Chapter 347. Old Feline gloomily said, "It's useless. We are too weak compared to a big consortium like the Melon Consortium. They are prepared this time, so they won't leave us with a flaw that can be easily solved. I have carefully read the contract. Even if we sever our relationship with Jake and expel him from the family, the money will still be on our heads. This is the law made by the magistrate. They have already used this loophole to attack us. I wanted to see if he knew about this matter or not. It's not terrible to make a mistake, but I'm afraid it's intentional." Sandro was startled. His expression was somewhat dejected as he said, "Father, is there really no other way?" Old Feline whispered, "We can only rely on him. I hope that he can return as soon as possible so that we have the strength to fight back. Otherwise," Sandro smiled as he sat on the chair next to him. He pulled his hair in silence. Afternoon. Old Feline slowly went down the stairs with the help of Sandro. He came to the hall. Jake and his children were kneeling in front of the door of the study room. They silently bowed their heads. The people who were sitting in the hall and waiting anxiously saw Old Feline come out. They stood up and looked at the pillar of the family. Sandro's wife slowly stepped forward. She wanted to say something, but hesitated. However, she held it back. Old Feline came down from the wooden stairs and stood on the thick, soft carpet. He looked up at all the faces in the hall. There was a bit of trance in his eyes. He slowly said, "Everyone, go back and pack up your belongings. If someone else wants this place, then give it to them. We will go outside for a period of time." There was silence in the hall. Everyone was startled. They didn't expect that Old Feline wouldn't hand over the responsibility to Jake. Instead, he would bear the responsibility for the entire family. Such a huge debt, coupled with a high daily interest, they would never be able to pay it off. It was just a contract. They would be slaves for generations. The future generations would be burdened with a huge debt. In fact, they would be deprived of their aristocratic status. After a brief silence, some people knelt down in the hall. They cried and begged, "Master, this money is owed by the third young master. It has nothing to do with us. You can't let all of us bear the burden. Master, I beg you to expel the third young master." The hall was filled with cries and wails. Jake and his children who were standing behind Old Feline were shocked and angry. They were afraid that Old Feline wouldn't be able to withstand their pleas. Their hearts were cold and resentful. They used to live together and eat at the same table, although they secretly plotted against each other, but it was just a trivial matter. Now they wanted Old Feline to sever his relationship with them. It was the same as forcing him to the road of death. Jake secretly gritted his teeth and clenched his fists. He hated the Melon Consortium as well as the people who were begging. He hated the genius architect, although the latter brought prosperity and hope to the Ryan family. But at the same time, he also brought disaster. He was the victim of this war. He hated it. Old Feline's face turned ugly as he listened to the pleas in the hall. He lifted his crutch and pounded it on the ground. He stopped all the crying and coldly said, "Get up. Do you think that our family can survive after the expulsion of the third master? The enemy wants to destroy our families and our people to be destroyed in the dust. Now that the enemy is in the future, you kill each other first. Idiots! Idiots!" Old Feline was so emotional that he coughed violently. Sandro hurried to support him and caressed his chest. Jake wanted to step forward to support him, but was stopped by Sandro's fierce eyes. The people in the hall looked at each other and silently stopped crying. One of the middle-aged women said, "Father, the Melon Consortium wants to deal with the genius architect. It has nothing to do with our family. None of his inventions were sold to our family. We're going to be his scapegoats. Can't you ask him for help? Now that a disaster is coming, why won't he come forward?" Old Feline was angry as he heard his daughter's words, but coughed again. Sandro comforted her in a few words. At the same time, he looked up and shouted, "Shut up! Don't you know the reason? What nonsense are you talking about? First of all, this is the fault of the third brother. What does it have to do with the architect? Secondly, the architect didn't sell his inventions to us because our consortium doesn't have the ability to produce and market such advanced inventions. We are bound to be defeated by other consortia in the market. At present, the architect has gone outside the giant wall a few days ago to build a stronghold for our consortium. He hasn't returned yet. We're going to live in his castle. Do you want our family to be completely destroyed by your nonsense?" The people in the hall were speechless as they heard his majestic roar. The middle-aged woman was startled. She lowered her head and didn't say a word. Old Feline calmed down and looked at the crowd. There was disappointment in his face as he whispered, "Help me into the carriage." "Yes," Sandro whispered. Sandro returned to the castle to preside over the overall situation after helping Old Feline into the carriage. He directed everyone to pack their luggage and move. Outside the giant wall, every day, Dean carried out the work of transporting the flesh and blood of the splitter to the cave of the splitter. He monitored the growth of the little splitter. On the third day, the last little splitter was hatched. Dean knocked it down and pulled out its limbs. It lost its fighting ability and became an incubator for the parasitic soul worm. Every day, it fed on the flesh and blood of the splitter to catalyze its growth. On the fifth day, the flesh of Splitter was almost completely cut off by Dean and the other two. Dean moved all of it to Splitter's cave. He told Gwyneth to pick out 5 of the limbs and send them into the giant wall. Then he used his status in the temple to exempt half of the Holy Church's toll. Half of the 5 limbs would be counted as gold coins and would be given to the temple. The rest of the materials would belong to himself. Dean wanted to use the 5 blade-like limbs to create several sets of top hunter equipment and weapons. As for the so-called hunter armors forged by the Temple of Elements, the material was too inferior. Moreover, the armor made from the scales of higher-level monsters was expensive. Most hunters couldn't afford it. Moreover, the defensive power of the armor couldn't be compared with the shell of the splitter. Chapter 348. 6th day. Master, there's a message from the giant wall. It said that there is an urgent matter. Gwyneth returned to the subway and found Dean. She took out a letter and handed it to him. Dean's eyebrows twitched as he took the letter and opened it. He looked calm as he read it. He burned the letter to ashes with a match, cut the rest of the materials, and found a hidden place near the passage to build a hunting base. Sergei, you will be responsible for this matter. I don't need to elaborate on the location and the structure of the base. Of course, Sergei replied. Gwyneth asked, Master, Noise said that there is an urgent matter. Is it anything important? She was referring to Jin's real name. Dean faintly smiled. It's a good thing. Don't worry. Good thing? There was a trace of suspicion in Gwyneth's eyes. She could see from Noise's anxious expression that it was not a good thing. Was the situation so serious that Dean deliberately hid it from them? But looking at the calm appearance of the youth, it didn't seem that he was deliberately pretending. Gwyneth was full of suspicions as various thoughts flashed through her mind. But on the surface, she was silent. Master, do you need me to write back to them? No, Dean said. Both of you don't need to enter the giant wall for the time being. Gwyneth replied, Yes. Sergei looked at Dean, but didn't make a sound. Whoosh. Dean left the subway and went to the cave of splitters. He moved the boulders and entered the cave. He fed the 7 little splitters and then found a flat and dry place to sit down. He leaned against the rock wall and looked at the glimmer of light that penetrated through the boulders. After a long time, his eyebrows twitched. He reached into his backpack and took out a huge cold crystal. It had a blue luster and was relatively pure. He stared at it for a moment, and then bit his left hand to hold the cold crystal. Soon, this cold crystal was melted by his blood. It was like a living mucus that drilled into the wound on his finger. It turned into a thin blue line that flowed along his arm and into his body. Wherever it passed, a cold air quickly spread. It was incomparably cold. A moment later, the cold crystal flowed into his body, and his chest felt cold. The next moment, this cold feeling seemed to scatter and quickly flowed to every part of his body, causing him to shiver slightly. As the energy of the cold crystal diluted throughout his body, the cold feeling gradually subsided. Dean gradually felt an abundance of vitality bursting out from his body. His eyes seemed to be much brighter. It was as if the air had been washed by heavy rain. It seems that I can continue to improve my physique. Dean looked at his left hand, but I can't continue to absorb anymore. Otherwise, my left hand is likely to freeze again. The damage is too great. I should be able to adapt by absorbing one a day. He put down his sleeves and looked at the 7 little splitters on the ground. After a few days of feeding, the bodies of the little splitters had grown rapidly. Originally, it would take 1 to 2 months to grow to more than 10 meters. But now it only took a few days for them to grow to 8 or 9 meters. He believed that in a few days they would enter the growth period and the larvae of the parasitic soulworms would hatch. Grow. The bigger the better. Dean's mouth curved into a smile. Commercial district. Tyza River. Castle. Mr. Noyce, did you deliver the letter? Old Feline looked at Noyce as he got up and asked. Zindral, Jake, and the others looked at Noyce. Noyce knew that Old Feline was a noble who had bailed out Dean. He didn't dare to neglect him. Old Patriarch, I have delivered the letter. I believe that it will reach the hands of the young master soon. He should come back as soon as possible if he sees the letter. Old Feline was relieved. Zindral, Jake, and the others were also relieved as they sat back in their chairs. I hope he will come back as soon as possible. Old Feline sighed. Noyce said, I have sent people to wait at the exit. If there is any news, they will report back. That's good. Thank you for your hard work. Old Feline nodded. At this time, a brown-haired teenager who was standing on the other side of the castle looked at the clock on the wall. He saw that the time was almost up. He said to Old Feline and others, Patriarch, there will be distinguished guests coming. Do you want them to leave? Old Feline looked at the teenager. Distinguished guest? Yes, our young master's distinguished guest. The teenager nodded. Old Feline looked at Zindral. You go upstairs and be quiet. Yes. Zindral got up and led the way. The rest of the people silently followed. The Ryan family had suffered a great disaster. The whole family was like a frosted eggplant. There was no trace of anger in them. The teenager looked at the servants. Clean up and get ready to welcome the distinguished guest. Yes. After a moment, a carriage stopped in front of the castle. A woman dressed in simple and noble clothes got off the carriage. She smiled at the teenager and Noyce. I heard that Mr. Dean is free today. Why did you inform me to come over to talk about the cooperation of Lightning Rod? The youth smiled. Hello, Miss Rosie. I'm Crone, Mr. Dean's butler. This is our knight, Captain Noyce. Please come in and talk about the divine incantation. Rosie politely nodded to both of them. She saw Old Feline sitting in the hall. Her eyes slightly moved as she smiled. I didn't expect the chairman of the New World Consortium to be here. I was in a hurry, so I didn't prepare a gift. Please forgive me. You are welcome. Old Feline smiled. He was surprised as he didn't expect that Dean's distinguished guest would be from the Scott Consortium. Moreover, Dean hadn't come back yet. How could he talk about the cooperation at this time? He couldn't help but look at Crone. The latter had stayed in his castle, and Old Feline had carefully cultivated him. But now it seemed that it was difficult to see through him. Crone went back to the living room and ordered the servant to make tea for Rosie. He invited her to take a seat. Miss Rosie, our young master is not here today. He is preparing a new invention. He has already told me about the lightning rod, and I have printed the contract. Please have a look. If there is no problem, you can sign it now. Rosie was startled. Her eyes flashed. According to the intelligence of the consortium, she naturally knew what had happened recently. She also knew where the genius architect was now. Therefore, when she came today, she was full of doubts. Now it seemed that the other party had already left a contract, which made her a little surprised. She took the contract from Crone's hand and carefully read it. In addition to the basic terms of the contract, there were several specific treaties. Although it was a bit difficult, but she felt that it was acceptable. After all, this was an extremely important civil invention. After a moment, Rosie looked at Crone and said, There's no problem with the contract. I didn't expect Mr. Dean to be so bold as to let you, a steward, deal with the upper grade 4-star item. It seems that he trusts you very much. Her voice was thought-provoking. Crone smiled. Miss Rosie is too polite. Young master has always trusted us. If you think there are no problems with the contract, then please sign it. Chapter 349. Crone smiled. Miss Rosie, our young master has already expected your words. He asked me to tell you that if your Scott Consortium wants to buy the next item, then you have to buy it at the price of a legendary item. You can go back and discuss it. Time is limited, so please seize the opportunity. Rosie was startled. Old Foulene, who was sitting on the chair, was also startled. Legendary item price. Rosie suspected that there was a problem with her ears or the teenager's mouth. Of course, it was more likely that there was a problem with the architect's brain. Although Dean's prices were getting more and more outrageous, but she was mentally prepared. She wouldn't be surprised if Dean told her that the price of the next item would be at the top of 5 stars. After all, he was a proud genius. However, she didn't expect him to directly raise the price to the legendary level. What was a legendary item? It was a masterpiece of an era. In history, there were very few masters who could create legendary theurgies, let alone the same master who could create 2 legendary theurgies. Such a person could be called a legend himself, and it was very rare. Rosie was startled for a moment before she realized that she had lost her composure. She wanted to criticize the young butler, but she knew that the latter was trusted by Dean. If she offended him, then he might speak ill of her behind her back in the future. She immediately restored her smile. It seems that architect Dean is very confident in his new invention. But the price is too high. Although our consortium wants to buy it, but our financial resources can't keep up. It's not that we don't have confidence in architect Dean, but please forgive us. All right. Crone smiled. I'll pass on Miss Rosie's words to the young master. Rosie politely smiled, although Dean told her to go back and discuss the matter before giving a conclusion, but she knew that the consortium would never agree. The price of a legendary item and a 5-star item were like heaven and earth. Even a big consortium like the Scott Consortium would suffer a lot if they wanted to buy a legendary item. Moreover, they hadn't seen the goods yet. If they paid directly, then they would be surpassed by other consortiums. It was a pleasant cooperation this time. I'll take my leave first. Rosie didn't say anything more and stood up to bid farewell. Crone also got up. A letter appeared in his hand. Miss Rosie, my family's young master asked me to pass this to you. Rosie took it and was about to open it on the spot when Crone said, Miss Rosie, I won't send you off. Hearing this, Rosie looked up at him, put away the thought of unraveling it, nodded, and walked out of the living room. Crone and Noyce saw her off. After Rosie left, the two returned to the living room. Old Foulene looked at Crone. Isn't Dean outside the giant wall? Has the new invention been produced? Or do you want to use this Miss Chai's mouth to spread this gimmick and increase your reputation? Crone bowed his head and said, I don't know. Young master only told me to do this. He didn't tell me the reason. Old Foulene was startled, but didn't say anything. In the carriage, Rosie sat in the spacious carriage. After driving hundreds of meters away from the castle, she took out the envelope from her sleeve. Her eyes flashed as she slowly opened it. Inside was the most expensive snow paper with a faint fragrance. There were dense and beautiful characters on it, and there was a touch of sharpness in the outline. She read it from top to bottom, and her brows wrinkled more and more tightly. After reading it, she immediately closed the letter. She looked at the air in front of her as she fell into deep thoughts. Mel family. Office in the castle. In the dark and luxurious office, Sarah slowly put down the quill pen. She leaned on the chair in a comfortable position to relieve the pain in her neck. She looked at the short-haired maid Lisa in front of the desk. Are you sure? Yes. Lisa didn't dare to look at her eyes. She lowered her head and said, according to the informant of the Chai family, Miss Rosie went out today to talk about the lightning rod with architect Dean. Sarah gently pinched the quill pen. I heard that he sent people from outside the giant wall. They brought back a batch of high-end monster materials. Old Foulene's letter should have been sent to him. Is there any movement in the passage? No. Lisa bowed her head. Knight Captain Charlemagne, who guards the entrance of the passage, has fallen in love with the young architect. It is not easy to bribe him. But according to an informant we have placed in the team, the architect hasn't returned to the giant wall. The 2 criminals who were bailed out with him also haven't returned. It is estimated that the letter hasn't been delivered to him yet. Sarah narrowed her eyes. Let people keep an eye on him. If there is any movement, immediately report. Yes. Selling the invention to the Scott Consortium at this time. Humph. He wants to use the Scott Consortium to suppress us when we are sure of cash flow. He is really worthy of being able to climb out of the Thornflower prison. His plan is deep enough. He has prepared everything before he left the giant wall. However, we can't destroy the Scott Consortium in a short time. It's easy for us to destroy the New World Consortium. He ran out of the giant wall during this sensitive period. It's tantamount to giving his back to us. If we don't give him a knife or two, then we will be sorry for him. Miss, the newspaper has prepared the article. We will publish it when the barbarians attack. Well, no matter what genius he is, he will become the public enemy of the people. No one can protect him. Outside the giant wall, Splitter's Cave. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. It was the 8th day since he came to the giant wall. 7 huge shadows were swaying on the ground. They rolled from time to time. They were the 7 little splitters. However, they were no longer little. After 8 days of nourishment from the flesh and blood of the great splitter, their body had skyrocketed. Due to their incomplete body, their need for food was greater. However, Dean had smeared lime powder on the incomplete parts of their body. It was difficult for them to grow back. Their size had increased rapidly. Fortunately, the cave was big enough. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to accommodate these 7 giants. Dean leaned against the rock wall. He estimated the time. 8 days had passed. Presumably, it was time to go back. He turned his head to look at the 7 splitters. Yesterday, they had already reached the size of a splitter, but he didn't kill them immediately. Instead, he continued to raise them. In any case, the flesh of these splitters would rot here even if he didn't eat them. Moreover, he still had time, so he was waiting for the moment he needed. Now the right moment had come. He grabbed the bow and arrow and went to the deepest part of the cave. He was more than 10 meters away from the splitter. He pulled the bow and aimed at the splitter. It was a non-toxic arrow, but it was also a deadly arrow. Puff. Chapter 350. Dean put away the bow and arrow and stared at it. After confirming that it was really dead, he quickly approached it, pulled out the dagger, and cut the place where the arrow had penetrated. Blood suddenly gushed out, soaking the sand into dark red. He put his palm into the wound and soaked it in Splitter's body, waiting for the parasitic soul worm to feel his body temperature and crawl over automatically. Otherwise, he didn't know how long it would take for him to dissect such a huge body and search everywhere. However, he could use such a simple and crude method to collect the parasitic soul worm, mainly relying on his Defiler magic mark. The hidden ability of the Defiler magic mark was revealed when he was still a junior hunter, and that was the extraordinary immunity to most viruses. Even if he was bitten by an undead or soaked in the blood of other monsters, he would not be infected. This was difficult for other hunters. Even senior hunters were no exception. The boiling blood of the monster was sticky and slippery. Dean slightly frowned, quietly waiting, but his heart was a little nervous. Time passed minute by minute. 5 or 6 minutes later, Dean suddenly felt a slight numbness on the back of his hand, as if he had been stabbed by something. At the same time, there was a soft, horny, tentacle-like object passing through the back of his hand, drilling along the back of his hand, sending bursts of tearing pain. Dean quickly retracted his hand and suddenly saw a horrifying scene. There was a dark red worm lying on the back of his hand, with very small needle-like tentacles at the front. It was relatively hard, and it was cutting the surface skin of the back of his hand, drilling into it. Below the seemingly round body, there was a row of very short, pointed feet, helping it to crawl into the back of his hand. Such a disgusting scene made his scalp tingle. His body's instinctive reaction was to shake off the insect, but he endured it. At the same time, his heart was relieved. Although this insect was a little small, its appearance was similar to the parasitic soul worm he had seen in the Great Splitter's body. It was just that he was too far away to see it clearly, but now he could clearly see the structure of its body. It was a bit like a fleshy centipede, but its legs were shorter and thinner than centipedes. Hiding under its body, it looked like it was naked. Splitter's parasitic soul worm. Dean took a deep breath, raised his right hand, and stared at the parasitic soul worm that kept drilling into the back of his hand. Such a strange scene made his eyelids twitch slightly, but when he thought of the great power the ladder could bring, he endured the nausea. He pursed his lips, didn't say a word, and watched the whole body of the parasitic soul worm drill into the back of his hand. As it drilled into the back of his hand, the wound on the back of his hand did not bleed, and the wound seemed to heal quickly. But the back of his hand was protruding in the shape of a worm, twisting and crawling rapidly along his arm. Dean's face was ugly. He raised his arm, watching the worm in the protruding skin quickly crawling toward him, as if it wanted to enter his brain along his shoulder. Such an illusion made his heart suddenly shiver, and he hurriedly grabbed his throat with both hands, tightly squeezing it. At the same time, he paid attention to the movement of the little worm. He saw it crawling to his right shoulder, straight up along the shoulder collarbone. Although he could not see it from this angle, he could feel the feeling of countless thin feet crawling along the collarbone, like a large group of connected ants. This feeling made his hair stand on end, and a large layer of goosebumps arose on his body. Soon, the worm crawled to the throat that was squeezed by his palm, and, at the edge of his palm, he could feel the skin below protruding, touching his palm. Dean's face changed. He did not expect that the place this parasitic soul worm wanted to parasitize was his brain. What a joke. He clenched his throat, and the other hand bent and flicked. The protruding skin was flicked, and Dean could feel the disgusting crawling movement through his throat, extending down along his throat, and soon came to his chest. He quickly tore off his shirt, looked down, and suddenly saw a worm in the middle of his chest. The worm wriggled and crawled, but it did not crawl toward the magic mark of the defiler in the middle of his chest, but turned a corner. The direction it was moving toward seemed to be the heart. Dean's pupils shrank, and his heart was filled with anger. What was going on with this parasitic soul worm? It was not the head, but the heart. Both were the core of his body. Once it was damaged, he would die instantly. This was not parasitism, it was simply taking his life. He raised his hand to block the protruding skin, so that the parasitic soul worm could not move forward. At the same time, his other hand had quickly pulled out the dagger. His heart was angry, puzzled, and more frightened. If this thing sank into his body, it would be difficult for him to catch it. He even regretted why he let this thing drill into his body. Or was it that the way he replaced the magic mark was wrong? He was ready. Once this thing sneaked under the skin, he would immediately stab it. Even if he was seriously injured, he had to kill it. After he blocked the way with his palm, the parasitic soul worm hidden under the skin suddenly crawled along the edge of his palm. Dean immediately moved his palm, and wherever it went, his palm intercepted it. After repeating this for a few minutes, the parasitic soul worm under the skin seemed to understand that it was futile to continue. It slowly changed its direction, crawled toward the magic mark of the defiler in the middle of his chest, and slowly sank. Dean was relieved when he saw this, but he had some doubts. Why didn't the parasitic soul worm go to the magic mark of the defiler in the beginning? Instead, it went straight to the two most fatal places on his body, as if it knew in advance that these two places were his vital points. Was it a characteristic of the parasitic soul worm itself? Or was the physical difference between him and the defiler too big? Or was this parasitic soul worm also aggressive? His face was uncertain. He stared at the magic mark of the defiler on his chest. He saw that the red blood vessels of the defiler's magic mark quickly shriveled after the parasitic soul worm crawled over. It didn't take long for the shriveled skin of the red blood vessels to slowly bulge again, but the color was not red, but dark black. At the same time, the shape was not a round blood vessel, but a layer of cuticle-like tissue, and the shape also became a rhombus-shaped triangle. Dean wanted to reach out and touch it, but suddenly felt a little dizzy, and his eyelids were heavy. He was shocked in his heart. He wanted to bite the tip of his tongue to refresh himself, but his thoughts became very chaotic and heavy. Before he could bite the tip of his tongue, his whole body was weak, and he couldn't hold up his eyelids. His eyes turned black, and he fainted. In the darkness, Tom was in a trance. Dean woke up abruptly. He turned over and sat up from the ground. He hurriedly looked around and saw that the 6 splitters were still lying on the other side of the cave. He was relieved, but soon he was stunned because he found that the bodies of the 6 splitters were emitting fiery red heat, as if there was magma flowing in their bodies, emitting a huge amount of heat. How could the heat be seen? He was startled for a moment, and suddenly thought of something. He looked down and saw that the blood vessels of the Defiler's magic mark on his chest had been replaced by a long black, but protruding rhombus-shaped magic mark. He reached out and gently touched it. It was not soft like before, but hard and sharp, like a piece of scale. This was the magic mark of the Defiler? The replacement was successful? He blinked his eyes and turned his head to look at the 6 splitters again. Once again, he saw the scarlet heat emitted from their bodies. When he looked at the dead splitter beside him, there was only an extremely weak heat emitting from its body. It was like the embers and the ashes that could be extinguished at any time. This is the ability of the magic mark of the Defiler? Thermal vision? No. In addition to thermal vision, there's also dark vision. Wait, does it mean that my magic mark of the Defiler is still there? Dean's heart jumped. Dark vision was one of the signature abilities of the Defiler's magic mark. He looked around and found the dagger that he was previously holding. He immediately used his nails to cut the hilt. The hilt of the dagger was intact without any scratches. Dean was startled. There was some disappointment in his eyes as he smiled bitterly. It seemed that he had thought too much. The dark vision should be one of the abilities of the magic mark of the splitter. Moreover, the dark vision also had thermal tracking ability. No wonder the splitter was able to find the magic claw crocodile that was hiding in the swamp. This is a good tracking ability. It can basically observe all the lurking monsters in the surroundings. Even the cold-blooded creatures are no exception. The cold-blooded creatures also have body temperature, especially the heart. Dean was happy in his heart. His visual organization had been greatly improved. Most of the other aspects had also evolved. However, there was no record of the magic mark of the splitter in the Monster Atlas. There was no way to understand it. He could only rely on himself to slowly explore and observe in the future. He twitched his nose and sniffed the air. Suddenly, he heard a rustling sound, as if countless insects were crawling around him. His expression changed as he looked around, but he didn't see any tiny red shadows. There shouldn't be any insects lurking around him. However, when he sniffed carefully, he could clearly hear a very subtle sound. This sound was very strange. It sounded like countless grains of sand flowing, but also like the sound of water splashing. After more than 10 minutes, Dean finally figured out the source of the sound. It was from the smell. In other words, he could smell the smell. It could also be said that he could smell the smell of the smell. Could this be the extremely rare synesthesia that only appears once in 100 million in medical science? Dean had read a lot of knowledge from the super chip. Naturally, he was most concerned about the medical aspect. Therefore, he knew about the term synesthesia. The symptoms were just like the literal meaning. The human body's senses were mixed up. The reason why he had such a judgment was because he could still hear the rustling sound even when he blocked his ears. Moreover, he could hear it most clearly when he sniffed. My vision has evolved from the original dark vision to night vision and thermal vision. Smell and hearing are mixed up. The range of smell has been reduced. It's not as far as the magic mark of the Defiler, but I can smell the sound emitted by the smell. If combined with my ears, the range of smell is equivalent to the range of my hearing. It seems that my perception ability will reach the extreme within my hearing range. Basically, no monster can hide from me. The eyes, nose, and ears have evolved, but the mouth doesn't seem to have changed much. There are changes in the body. My fingernails and toenails have become harder. They're not like human fingernails, but more like metal blades. I haven't found any abnormalities in other parts of the body. After a period of sorting out and sensing, Dean classified his changes. He was extremely satisfied with his current abilities. It was worthy of being a legendary magic mark, although the range of perception was not as far as the Defiler, but within a certain range, it was like a skynet that formed an absolute perception field. His sense of smell and hearing could distinguish all the hidden sounds and smells. His vision could see the monsters hidden in the soil. It could be said that there were no blind spots. Unless some monsters had an extremely special lurking ability, they could hide from his eyes. This kind of perceptive ability was much stronger than the average magical creatures that were bestowed names with perceptive abilities. However, it was not surprising for the Splitter. After all, the Splitter's own evolution direction was based on extreme attacks. In addition to the body structure and posture, the perception must also reach the corresponding level. Otherwise, the strength of the Splitter would not be able to find the opponent. If the enemy could easily escape, then it would not be worthy to be called a legendary monster. The so-called legendary referred to reaching the top in all aspects and reaching the extreme in one aspect. Such a monster could be called perfect and also called legendary. The perception is so strong. According to the evolution route of the Splitter, the combat ability of the magic mark should be even more terrible. Dean's eyes flashed. There was some eagerness in his heart. However, at the moment, he was pressed for time. He didn't have time to think about it. He stood up and walked to the 6 Splitters at the other end of the cave. The 6 Splitters were lying on the ground. Their bodies were gently twisting. When they saw Dean coming over, they squeaked. Dean was very familiar with this posture. It was the appearance of begging for food. He didn't pay attention to it. He grabbed the tail of one of the Splitter and dragged it to the side. He grabbed the dagger and stabbed it in the vital part of its body. The Splitter struggled fiercely, twisting its body, but it was held tightly by Dean. After rolling a few times, its struggle gradually weakened, and it stopped moving. Dean saw that it settled down. He twisted the dagger a few times to stimulate the wound. Seeing that there was still no reaction, he loosened his hand and cut open its body. The internal organs and other organs suddenly gushed out. Blood flowed like a flood, flowing everywhere. This time, Dean didn't dare to rashly reach out his hand to search for the parasitic soul worm in the boiling blood of the monster. Without the extraordinary resistance of the magic mark, even if it was a legendary magic mark, he was not sure if he could resist the germs and other small parasites on the body of these monsters. Chapter 351. Dean's figure moved. His boots stepped on a shallow part of the pool of blood, pulled out the arrow, and used the feather of the arrow to pick up the red-hot thing in the pool of blood. His strength was gentle, and a parasitic soul worm similar to the previous one flew out. He took off his clothes and caught it. He opened the jar he prepared in his pocket, poured the worm into it, and then poured the filtered water into it. The parasitic soul worm was soaked in the filtered water, and the blood on its body suddenly dyed the whole bottle red. Dean shook it, opened the jar, bit his finger, and let the blood flow along the mouth of the jar in a straight line to the edge of the jar. After a moment, the parasitic soul worm in the jar slowly crawled out along the blood. Dean reached out to hold it, and the parasitic soul worm fiercely struggled as if it was frightened. 2 small spikes stabbed into his palm, but there was no pain, only a slight numbness. Dean took out the prepared magic liquid syringe, folded it from the middle, stuffed the little thing into the syringe, buckled it, and pushed a section of the syringe into it. The parasitic soul worm seemed to be a little panicked in the narrow magic liquid syringe and struggled fiercely. Dean pushed the metal handle and immediately pushed the parasitic soul worm to the bottom of the syringe. As he increased his strength, the little thing's body was suddenly squeezed and burst open, turning into a pool of mud. At the same time, the whole of the magic liquid syringe was filled with dark red mucus, almost seeping out. Dean immediately pierced the needle into the magic mark on his chest. The hard magic mark was as smooth as snake phosphor. After piercing several times, it was difficult to pierce a few millimeters. Dean controlled his strength and pushed the dark red mucus in the syringe into the magic mark. The parasitic soul worm in the syringe had long been torn apart, turning into mucus that flowed into the needle and injected into the magic mark. Dean repeatedly pulled the magic liquid syringe several times, completely flattening it into mucus and injecting it into the magic mark. Finally, in the syringe, only the flattened and shriveled skin was left. Dean put away the syringe and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He felt the changes in the magic marks on his chest. There was a feeling of saturation. His whole body seemed to be full of strength. He turned his head to look at the remaining splitters. Without pausing, he put away the syringe and dragged another splitter over. He slaughtered it, collected the parasitic soul worm, and injected it into his magic marks. The luster of the splitter's magic mark seemed to have changed after absorbing the second parasitic soul worm of the same kind. There was a touch of dark silver at the edges of the rhombus. Dean rested for 10 minutes and continued to kill the third splitter. In the blink of an eye, Dean had absorbed 4 splitters' parasitic soul worms. He dragged one of the remaining 2 splitters. This splitter and the other one seemed to realize what would happen to them. When they were dragged by Dean, they violently struggled and screamed, seeming to be frightened and demonstrating. Dean dragged the splitter to a slightly open place and waved his dagger to kill it. He cut open the soft part of its body and saw a red spot sliding down along its internal organs that were exuding heat. He squatted down, picked it up with the arrow shaft, and put it into the jar. After washing it, he lured it to crawl out and threw it into the syringe. The 5th one, Dean looked at the struggling parasitic soul worm in the syringe. There was some nervousness and expectation in his heart. Although the success rate of devouring 5 of the same kind might not be 100%, he had prepared the 6th one. If the 6th one also failed, he still had the little splitter inside the giant wall. According to the Dragon Girl, the success rate of devouring 7 of the same kind was 70%. This was already a very high probability. Dean was ready to devour 7, but he still hoped that he would succeed when devouring 5. He hoped that his luck would not be so bad. He secretly prayed in his heart. Although the object of his prayer was aimless, this kind of prayer in the face of danger seemed to be a hidden instinct in his genes. He took a deep breath and pointed the needle at the previous magic mark. He rubbed the handle of the syringe and slowly pushed it. The vortex in the syringe quickly crushed and flattened the parasitic soul worm. Mucus and blood burst out. This liquid was mixed and injected along the needle into Dean's magic mark. Success! Success! Dean clenched his teeth and secretly shouted in his heart. The syringe was pushed to the end, but it was stuck in the body of the parasitic soul worm. He opened the air valve of the syringe, pulled back the handle, closed the air valve, and pushed it again. A little mucus remained in the needle, pushed by the air pressure, and slowly injected into the magic mark. Dean repeatedly pushed it several times until the 5 parasitic soul worms were completely squeezed out. He pulled out the syringe and saw only a thin layer of skin at the bottom of the syringe. The bodies of the 5 parasitic soul worms only had a very thin layer of skin. Most of the body structure was the soft internal tissue. Dean was nervous and looked down at the magic mark on his chest. Time passed. After a few minutes, there was still no change in the magic mark. His face was ugly. He didn't expect his luck to be so bad. He gritted his teeth and came to the last remaining splitter. When the splitter saw Dean, it screamed in horror and moved back in fear. If other hunters saw this, they would be surprised. A dignified legendary monster was actually afraid of a human. Dean squatted down and was about to make a move. Suddenly, he felt an indescribable strange feeling from his chest to his whole body. Then, there seemed to be countless ants crawling on his back. It was very itchy. He was startled and took a few steps back. After he was far away from the splitter, he turned his head and suddenly saw a frightening scene. On both sides of his back, there were protruding blood vessels. These blood vessels were very thin and dense like a bright red silk net, forming a strange blood pattern. Moreover, the color of the blood was getting brighter and brighter. At the same time, he felt bursts of tearing pain, which was getting more and more intense. Very quickly, the blood vessels under the skin on his back became extremely clear, as if they were protruding out of his skin. The tearing pain also reached an extreme. He clenched his teeth and almost roared in pain, but very quickly he saw a shocking scene. A large amount of dead skin appeared on the skin on his back, and at the same time, there was a blazing hot air coming out his back. He had a terrifying feeling that his back was about to be separated from his body. This unknown change came from his body. Even with his temperament, he still felt a trace of fear, and it even made him forget about the pain. Soon, he saw the source of this terrifying change. He saw the dead skin on his back crack and fall off, and suddenly, a transparent light lit up on his back. A breeze blew. Time seemed to be frozen. The transparent, thin wings unfurled from his back, stirring up a breeze that hit his face, causing him to be completely stunned. Wings? I actually have wings? He was stunned for a long time before he recovered. He suspected that he was a little dazzled. He blinked his eyes. The transparent, thin wings were still swaying on his back. It was very real. His eyes widened, and his heart was a little stunned. Is this the legendary magic mark deified? He suddenly remembered that the little splitter had stretched out its wings when it was chasing him. Yes, the splitter had wings like an insect. They were hidden under the sharp blade carapace on their back. However, the splitter's physique was too big. Their wings couldn't support them to fly at high altitude. They could only glide at low altitude, or use their wings to increase their speed when running up, or they could rotate in the air to turn over in close combat. However, the magic mark of the splitter had made him grow wings after the deification. Just like the splitter's wings, Dean couldn't help but touch the transparent wings on his back. He only felt that it was warm. It was different from the wings of an insect. The wings were extremely hard like a thin metal blade. He used his fingers to pinch it. However, it was only slightly deformed. When his fingers loosened, it returned to its original shape. The toughness was amazing. Dean tried to control the transparent wings. He found that there were 2 arms extending from his back. It was a wonderful feeling. He gently flapped the wings. It felt like the palm of his hand was brushing against the breeze. It was carefree and light. He gradually increased the frequency of flapping. Suddenly, a strong wind was generated. His body gently left the ground and floated up. Dean looked down and could see that his toes were dozens of centimeters off the ground. He was excited and excited. He could fly. He could fly by relying on his body. He landed and controlled the wings to move left and right. It was very obedient and natural. He played for a while before he recovered. There was a strange feeling in his heart. He didn't know whether he should be excited or depressed. There was no doubt that the wings were of great help to him. They could help him occupy the air advantage. Especially when he was hunting, he could enter an invincible state when he met some land monsters. He could only attack and not defend. However, as a human, he had a pair of insect-like wings. Was he still human? He suddenly felt that while the parasitic soul worm provided him with power, it was also quietly changing his nature. At least, whether it was the definition of human in the old era or the post-disaster era, he did not belong to the category of human. Perhaps, as the nobles said, hunters were all monsters. Indeed, after absorbing the parasitic soul worm, the limbs changed. Some hunters' palms turned into claws, some pupils became red, and some teeth became sharp. These were all non-human characteristics. Moreover, long-term hunting, fighting on the edge of life and death, exposing the mood, and the violent tendency in human nature was greatly stimulated. Coupled with the changed appearance, it seemed that there was no difference from a monster. Thinking of this, he suddenly felt a faint sadness in his heart. Even the excitement he felt when he obtained the wings faded away. He sighed and controlled the wings to retract them. When he looked back at his appearance after the wings were retracted, he suddenly saw that there were still countless blood vessels on his back, like countless blood vessels. He was startled. He controlled the wings to lift up. Looking through the gap, he could still see the blood vessels. These blood vessels extended from his back to his waist and his nape. He lowered his head and raised his arm. He looked from his armpit to his waist. He found that his armpit and waist were also covered with blood vessels. Moreover, he saw these blood vessels on his arms, chest, and legs. He was like a person who was entangled by countless blood vessels. His pupils shrank, and his heart was aghast. Although there was no mirror in the darkness, but he could imagine his appearance after being entangled by the blood vessels. He could also imagine how ugly his face would be at the moment. If he went back with this appearance, it was estimated that it would be extremely difficult to step into the Temple of Elements. The fame that he had accumulated in the past, as well as the many tagged images that he had, would also collapse. He would only be evaluated with one word: monster. Especially under the influence of other hostile consortia, this word would be imprinted in everyone's mind. Dean clenched his teeth and clenched his fists. He saw that the blood vessels on his fists were pressed down because of the clenching of his fists. The blood flow suddenly slowed down. His heart was angry. He turned to look at the softly growling splitter. Suddenly, the anger on his face disappeared. He saw that the splitter's body was also entangled by countless blood vessels. However, these blood vessels were several times thicker than his. He could even see the blood flowing in some of the thicker blood vessels. Dean was startled for a moment. He thought of a possibility. He turned to look at the splitter that he had just killed. The latter's body was also entangled by blood vessels, but the color was lighter. Seeing this scene, he immediately heaved a sigh of relief and smiled bitterly. He liked to scheme, but in the end, he was scared by himself. His body didn't change much, but his eyes changed. His eyes seemed to have evolved again after the magic marks were divinized. In addition to the previous dark vision and thermal vision, his thermal vision seemed to have gone a step further. He could even see the blood vessels in the body. This should belong to the light X-ray ability. I didn't expect that the effect of the divinization would not only stimulate the wings, but also cause changes in the eyeballs. Dean looked down again. He could still see the dense blood vessels. These blood vessels were extremely smooth. He could also see his heart in his chest. It was incomparably bright red and was beating. Every time it beat, the blood that flowed back to the heart would be stimulated to all parts of the body. Dean was relieved. Previously, when he stimulated the wings, he thought that there would be changes in his body. He was scared. Sure enough, his mind wasn't calm and calm enough. He gently sniffed to check other aspects of the ability. Chapter 352. Dean cleaned up the things on the ground and put on his hunter armor. Now that he didn't have the extraordinary resistance of the magic mark, the radiation and the rain outside the giant wall, as well as the germs contained in the rotten corpses of the monsters, would cause damage to his body. As for whether the magic mark of the splitter could improve his resistance or not, he would have to go back to the giant wall to test it out. Squeak! The splitter, who was lying in the corner of the cave, saw Dean's movement. It screamed in horror and shrank its body. Dean looked at it and whispered, "Don't be afraid. You survived." Now that the magic mark of the splitter had been deified, there was no need to kill the splitter for the time being. He would either sell the parasitic soul worm in its body or leave it to someone he could absolutely trust. At present, he didn't have any plans for either of these things, so he could only put aside for the time being. Dean moved away the boulder at the exit of the cave and went out. He felt a breath of fresh air blowing on his face. He turned back to block the cave. The corpses of the monsters in the cave would be enough for the splitter to eat for a month. It was estimated that some monsters would migrate here, since there was no activity of the splitter in the vicinity. But it would be difficult for these monsters to attack the splitter in the cave. The first reason was that they wouldn't dare to attack the splitter. The second reason was that the splitter had reached the growth stage. It was a level 40 hunter. Although he had cut off its limbs and it had no claws, but its body was still strong. Coupled with its sharp teeth, it could easily tear most of the monsters. Dean glanced around the cave and saw some small red heat emitting from the grass hundreds of meters away. From the shape, it should be a common low-end monster in the wilderness. It should be a level 1 and 2 earthworm and jungle monster frog. Dean took back his eyes and turned away. Whoosh! Dean was a little surprised. His speed was faster than his imagination. The wind whistled in his ears as if he was flying. His footsteps came to a halt, but his body steadily stopped, not swaying in the slightest. Dean couldn't help but look at his hands and feet. Did it mean that his physique was improved when the magic mark was deified? Had he evolved into a senior hunter? However, he remembered that the Dragon Clan girl had said that the divine magic mark would not improve his physique. Such speed is clearly possessed by a senior hunter. Moreover, only a top senior hunter can achieve this. Dean tried to run again. His steps were very easy, but his body was running forward at a very fast speed. With each step, he could jump 4 or 5 meters high. He could not help but jump with the help of a run-up. Suddenly, he felt like he was flying. He jumped 7 or 8 meters high. This was a leap of 2 floors. Dudyan's knees were slightly bent as he landed on the ground. He didn't dare to feel any pain in his feet. He was surprised as he hadn't seen such jumping power and speed from Sergei and Gwyneth. Although their physical activities were greatly affected by the steel nails, but at the moment of crisis both of them were close to their peak speed, but was still far from his current speed. Dean was surprised and happy. Although he wasn't clear about the situation, but the sudden increase in strength was an unexpected happy event. It was not in vain that the splitter was called a legendary monster. If the Dragon Clan girl didn't deceive me, then I'm still an intermediate hunter, at least at the magic mark and cellular level. The reason why I have such strength is probably because of some changes in some tissues in my body. The muscle groups on my legs and arms, and even all over my body, seem to have increased. Moreover, it's not a simple increase in muscle group. The muscle tissue should have mutated and produced power that is several times more than the original muscle group. Dean secretly speculated in his heart. If he wanted to confirm this speculation, then he only needed to go back to the giant wall and absorb new parasitic soul worms to become a senior hunter. If he could succeed, then it would mean that he was still an intermediate hunter. If he failed, then it would mean that the Dragon Clan girl had deceived him. Dean continued to run after sorting out his thoughts. Whoosh! The scenery in front of him was quickly pulled closer and then easily crossed over. The whistling wind hit his chest. Carefree and free, he smiled. After running for thousands of meters, Dean saw a dark red heat hidden in the ruins of a building overgrown with weeds. From the shape of the heat, it seemed to be a crocodile-like crawling creature. In such a humid environment, Dean suddenly thought of a monster, the jungle monitor lizard. He had not slowed down. He ran straight ahead and stopped dozens of meters in front of the building. He saw the giant lizard inside slowly swing its tail, as if it was disturbed by his arrival. Then, it slowly crawled to the gate of the ruined building. The gate was covered with moss and vines, as well as weeds that were more than 10 feet long, standing on the ground. It was completely covered. If there was no thermal vision, it would be hard to imagine that there was a giant lizard monster lurking in the grass, waiting for an opportunity to attack. I'll use you to practice my skills. Dean didn't mean to shake it off directly, nor did he want to pull out the arrow. After all, it was just a level 14 monster. If he was proficient in close combat, he could kill it alone with his previous speed and strength, not to mention his current keen speed. Even if his close combat ability was weak, he was still very confident. He bent down to pick up a stone and threw it. Whoosh! The stone shot into the vines and hit the face of the hidden lizard. But there was still no movement inside. Dean was surprised. He didn't expect this thing to be so tolerant. He bent down to pick up a boulder of 200 or 300 pounds, walked more than 10 meters, and threw it. Bang! As the boulder fell, the giant lizard inside immediately retreated to avoid it. At the same time, it rushed out like a tiger out of its cage, breaking through the weeds and vines, and rushed toward Dean. When it rushed out, Dean was surprised. This was not a jungle monitor, but a swordtail rock crocodile with a similar figure. It was a level 26 hunter. Run. Dean's first thought was to retreat. It must be known that when Glenn hunted the level 26 Black Weaver, she was in danger. Not to mention he was only an intermediate hunter and a melee rookie. Whoosh! He turned and ran, his figure like the wind. Bang! Bang! The swordtail rock crocodile chased after him. The ground shook as it ran, but the sound of the vibration was getting farther and farther away. Dean looked back. He didn't expect that in the blink of an eye, he had thrown it hundreds of meters away. He was shocked and stopped. Seeing the swordtail rock crocodile chasing him again, he slowed down and trotted. Although it was a trot, he still ran steadily in front of the ladder, easily controlling the distance between them. After running for thousands of meters, Dean gradually had a feeling of eagerness in his heart. It seemed that this level 26 monster was not as terrible as he had imagined. In other words, with his current physique, fighting it was not impossible. Thinking of this, he immediately slowed down, holding the dagger, turned around, and rushed up. Roar! When the sword-tail rock crocodile saw the prey it was chasing, it angrily opened its mouth to bite. Dean was already prepared. His body suddenly turned, and he slid to avoid it. In the blink of an eye, the dagger fiercely stabbed at the side of the crocodile's jaw, where the blood vessels were densely packed. With a puff, the dagger pierced through the scales of the side of the crocodile's jaw. The blood vessels that were densely packed together were suddenly cut by the dagger. Dean pulled back and pulled out the dagger at the same time, only to find that the tip of the dagger was bent. Dean was secretly shocked. He hurriedly dodged the sword-tail rock crocodile's tail sweep. He didn't know where the courage came from, but he grabbed the scales on its back and turned over to mount it. Roar! The sword-tail rock crocodile roared angrily. It twisted its head, wanted to bite back, but it could only twist its head to about 90 degrees, unable to bite Dean. On the other hand, Dean's fingernails were tightly gripping the crocodile's back. Like steel nails, they were nailed into its hard gray carapace. The hardness of this carapace was comparable to rock, which was one of the reasons why it was called a rock crocodile. But at this moment, it was nailed inside by Dean's class scales. Dean was violently jolted on the crocodile's body. He raised his fist in anger and fiercely smashed it on the crocodile's head. Bang! With a punch, the violently shaking body of the sword-tail rock crocodile knocked its head on the ground. Dean seized the opportunity and quickly punched again. Bang! With another punch, the sword-tail rock crocodile's jaw hit the ground again. Seeing this, Dean swung his fist repeatedly. The sword-tail rock crocodile was hit by Dean's fist. It twisted its body in pain and finally threw Dean away. After Dean landed on the ground, he pounced again, still full of vigor. At this time, the sword-tail rock crocodile seemed to be exhausted and moved a lot slower. Dean waved the blunt tip of the dagger and stabbed it in its eye socket, cutting a big hole. He jumped on its head and stepped on its upper jaw. At the same time, he pulled out the dagger and stretched out 2 fingers to dig into its eye socket, ruthlessly tearing its eye bone. A few minutes later, the sword-tail rock crocodile fell into a pool of blood, no longer breathing. Dean sat on it, panting lightly. His heart was somewhat palpitating, but he was more excited. He had actually killed a level 26 monster with his bare hands. This was a task that even some experienced senior hunters would find difficult to accomplish alone. They could only kill it by relying on an ambush trap or a geographical advantage that was favorable to them. But at this moment, he was completely relying on the difference in speed and strength between the two of them, without any external factors. In terms of speed, strength, and reaction speed, my body should be comparable to a top senior hunter. If I had used a bow and arrow before, I could have easily kited to death. Dean was excited. He thought that after getting the magic mark of the splitter, he could go back to the wall and buy other magic marks as nourishment to break through to a senior hunter. In his next plan, his strength was an important part. He didn't expect that after the deification of the magic mark of the splitter, he would have such strength, and there was hope for it to go further. Perhaps, even without the deification of the magic mark of the splitter alone would have such an impact. After all, he hadn't tested these aspects of his body before deification. Looking at the sword-tail rock crocodile, Dean stood up and collected the 2 relatively long and protruding molars from its mouth. Compared with the fat in its body and the leather armor on its body, the value of these 2 molars was much smaller. But for hunters like them, the value of these 2 molars was higher than gold. They could be forged into extremely sharp daggers or daggers. Dean washed the molars with the remaining filtered water and put them into his pocket. He turned around and left. As for the remaining leather armor and claws, he was too lazy to collect them. The price of selling them was high for ordinary hunters, but it was not worth mentioning for him. Whoosh! After more than 10 minutes, Dean returned to the subway. Gwyneth and Sergei heard the movement and came out from the ruins of a building. They were relieved to see Dean. Dean slowed down in advance. He had already seen the place where the 2 were hiding. He asked, "Are you ready?" "It's done," Sergei said. "According to your instructions, We moved the sharp limbs of the big guy to an underground stronghold near the giant wall. Dean nodded slightly and came to the subway to take a look. He saw a huge skeleton and rotten flesh lying inside. As for the sharp limbs on its body, they were all gone. "Let's go." Dean took back his eyes and led the way. Sergei and Gwyneth looked at each other and followed. In the blink of an eye, the three of them returned to the giant wall. Sergei trotted a few steps and came to the heavy giant door. He was too lazy to listen to Dudien's orders, but he heard Dudien's voice as he was about to pull the giant door. "Wait." Sergei's eyebrows rose as he looked at him. "What? Go back from here." Dean pointed to the giant wall. Sergei turned his head and couldn't help but smile. "Boss, are you joking? Do you think I would joke with you?" Dean looked at him and went to the side. He picked up the suction cup that he had used last time. He wiped off the dew and moisture on it and jumped 7 or 8 meters high. He pressed the suction cup on the giant wall. He didn't stop and climbed up like a gecko. Sergei and Gwyneth's pupils shrunk, and they were stunned. Dean climbed to a height of 400 or 500 meters. Sergei turned to look at Gwyneth. They saw the surprise in each other's eyes. They were surprised by Dean's strange climbing method, but they were even more surprised by the height that Dean had jumped. It didn't take long for Dean to climb to the top of the giant wall. This time, he had wings on his back, so he was in a relaxed state of mind. After climbing to the top of the giant wall, he quickly found the launcher and the remaining shark spears, as well as the ropes on the ground. He threw the rope down and signaled Sergei and Gwyneth to pull it. Soon, both of them were dragged up the giant wall by Dean. Their faces were pale, and they were frightened. Although they had faced more dangerous situations, but they had never experienced such a height. This kind of pressure and fear was like the first time they faced a monster. "What did you just climb up?" It was like a crawler. Sergei's forehead was sweating as he said with a wry smile. Dean faintly smiled. Crawlers were probably one of the few monsters that could cross the giant wall. He put away the rope and went to the other side of the giant wall. He found a place far away from the entrance and threw the rope down. Sergei and Gwyneth were the first to go down. Chapter 353. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Dean, Sergei, and Gwyneth climbed down from the wall. They were like monkeys in the jungle. They quickly drilled into the plains in front of them after they landed on the ground. "My young master, why didn't we come out from the passage?" Sergei was squatting in the grass. He broke a grass root and put it in his mouth. Dean looked up and indifferently said, "Haven't you learned to use your brain after being in prison for so long?" "We're not in prison right now. Is there any difference between a place under surveillance and a prison?" Gwyneth whispered, "Master, are you saying that someone is monitoring us from the passage? Is it your enemy?" "Not all of them are enemies. There are people who care about you." Dean turned to look at her. "I forbade you to come back because I want to cut off contact with the giant wall. In the case that we have lost contact with the giant wall, it is no different from being dead to the people inside the giant wall. If you were my enemy, when would you attack me, and when would I be defenseless?" Sergei suddenly realized, now, your brain isn't broken yet. Dean glanced at him and looked around. He saw that there were no people from the Holy Church lurking around. He immediately bent down and ran forward. Sergei bit off a piece of grass and quickly followed him. Dean took Sergei and Gwyneth to the defense of the Holy Church's fortress in about half an hour. They saw a fortress standing on the plain. Several teams of Knights of Light were patrolling nearby. In addition, there was a faint red glow in the grass on the left and right side of the fortress. It was shaped like a human. There were people lurking in it. Dean's eyebrows twitched. He was glad that he didn't take a Dieter last time when he brought Splitter back. Otherwise, he would have been seen by the sentries lurking on both sides of the fortress. "Master, the Holy Church's fortress is specifically designed to prevent us from sneaking back to the Holy Church. There are Knights of Light who are comparable to senior hunters. It won't be easy to sneak past them." Sergei looked at the fortress and said to Dean. Gwyneth looked up at Dean. Her face was calm, and he couldn't see any emotion. Dean looked at the dark sky. His eyes flashed as he looked at Sergei and Gwyneth, who were squatting in the grass. "Are you interested in joining me?" His tone was relaxed, as if he was asking them if they would like to have dinner together. Sergei and Gwyneth were startled. They looked at the smile on the boy's lips and felt like they were in a trance. Sergei was the first to react. His eyes widened. Kill them? Are you sure? Do you have the guts? Sergei said, there is nothing in this world that I don't dare to do. Gwyneth, what about you? As you wish. Dean faintly smiled and turned to look at the barrier. The strong wind swept the weeds around the three of them. He took the bow from his back and held it in his hand. He made a running posture. Get ready to kill. Front? I like it. Sergei licked his lips. There was a bit of excitement in his eyes as he clenched the spear. Gwyneth was silent. She slowly wrapped the bandages around her arms. Whoosh! Dean exerted force on the soles of his feet and rushed out. Sergei and Gwyneth followed behind him. The three of them rapidly approached the stronghold and soon appeared in the line of sight of the patrolling sentries on top of the stronghold. When the sentinel saw the three figures galloping towards them through his binoculars, he thought he was seeing things. He removed his binoculars and blinked. From the plains, he could faintly see three black dots rushing towards them. When he looked through his binoculars again, he realized he was not seeing things. There were three people rushing towards a stronghold, and they were all armed. Enemy attack? The sentinel was startled. He quickly turned around and ran to sound the alarm. Dong! The alarm rang over the barrier. The patrols and spies lurking in the vicinity of the stronghold were all alerted by the alarm. They looked at the stronghold in shock and quickly gathered towards it. Whoosh! Hundreds of meters away, a black arrow pierced through the neck of the sentinel who was constantly pulling the alarm. The strong force of the arrow lifted the sentinel's body off the ground and nailed him on the wooden pillar next to the alarm booth. Dean was already hundreds of meters away from the stronghold. A few seconds after he shot the sentinel, he had already crossed the countless arrows and rushed straight to the bottom of the stronghold. He didn't stop. It seemed that there was still a way in front of him. He raised his feet and fiercely stepped on the wall as he was about to hit the wall. He borrowed the force to run up the wall. The Knights of Light were shocked by this scene. Dean was already 13 or 14 meters away from the wall by the time they reacted. Shoot the arrows! The captain of the Knights on the barrier shouted in haste. Dean felt that his strength was not enough. His toes slammed into the ground, and his fingers quickly grabbed the high wall. A few shallow marks were left on the rock wall-like wall under his nails. He used the strength of his nails to grab the wall and jumped up. He rose like a phoenix under the high wall. The Knights of Light on the barrier were stunned, but they quickly reacted and hurriedly shot arrows. Dean waved the bow in his hand to block the arrows. He fell on the edge of the barrier and quickly rushed into the crowd. He put on the bow and grabbed a knight's spear. His arm shook, and he threw the knight who was holding the spear to the back of the barrier. The knight didn't catch the spear and screamed as he fell down. Dean grabbed the spear and waved it. The tip of the spear swept across and cut the throats of several Knights of Light that were surrounding him. Go! Go! Stop him! This person is... Some of the Knights of Light seemed to recognize the amazing enemy. However, they didn't have time to say Dean's name. Dean's spear pierced through their chests and sent them flying into the crowd. Nevertheless, some of the knights who were standing on the outer edge recognized Dean's identity and exclaimed in shock. Dudian was like a wolf in a flock of sheep. He quickly harvested the lives around him. Occasionally warm blood splashed on his face, but he didn't feel it. From time to time, he recalled the scene of Splitter rushing into the stronghold. He also recalled the scene of him killing the evil alchemist in the dark. In the blink of an eye, the passage of the barrier was full of corpses. Sergei and Gwyneth used their weapons to climb down from the high wall under the cover of Dean's absorption of firepower. You're Dean. There was a middle-aged knight who was guarding the barrier. He was in a hurry as he saw Dean's body bathed in blood. He wasn't able to finish his words as he was interrupted by Dean's spear. The knight's face turned cold as he waved his sword to fight with Dean. His face changed as soon as the fight started. The strength of Dean's spear shook the knight so much that he almost couldn't hold his weapon. Dean kept attacking the middle-aged knight's chest with his spear, forcing him to retreat step by step. His close combat ability was naturally inferior to other hunters, but compared to the knight inside the giant wall, the gap was narrowed a lot. At this moment, relying on speed and strength to crush the Knight of Light, who had a physique comparable to a senior hunter, he couldn't fight back. After a few minutes of fighting, both of them had exchanged hundreds of moves. The middle-aged knight's physical strength was gradually exhausted. Dudion's spear pierced through his chest, but didn't directly pierce through his heart. Dudion threw him to the bottom of the barrier. Dean jumped down from the high wall. The height of the wall was only about 20 meters. With his physique, he wouldn't suffer any injuries. The moment he landed, Dean used his spear to stab the middle-aged knight's neck. Architect, no. The middle-aged knight looked at Dean in horror. He waved his hand to resist, but couldn't stop the spear. His neck was pierced. His eyes were wide open as he looked at the direction of the barrier, where Dean was. Dean pulled out the spear and waved it again. He stabbed the chest, heart, hands, and feet a few times. He poked 7 or 8 holes in the body. Then he turned around and left. He relied on his thermal vision to quickly find the fish that had escaped the net and killed them. Sergei and Gwyneth were also covered in blood. They gathered around Dean. Both of them were out of breath. "Young master, are you done?" Sergei looked at the corpses. His face was tired but excited at the same time. Dean nodded. "Make some wounds on all the corpses. It is best to destroy the original wounds." Sergei immediately picked up the weapons on the ground and made up the wounds on the corpses. Gwyneth glanced at Dudion and followed Sergei to finish him off. Dean came to the side of the middle-aged knight. He took out an arrow from the quiver and nailed it into the knight's mouth. He held the knight's finger and slowly wrote 6 words on the sand. Chapter 354. Whoosh, whoosh. Sergei and Gwyneth jumped down from a wall and came to Dean's side. They were surprised to see the words written on the ground. Sergei quickly moved forward and lifted his foot to erase the words. Dean reached out his hand to stop him. Sergei looked at him in astonishment. "I wrote it." Dudion looked at both of them. "Is it done? Let's go." Sergei hurried to pull him. "Are you crazy? It's the light church up there. We've killed so many people. How can we survive after we silence them? If the news gets out and people find out that you did it, no matter who you are, you'll die. Do you understand?" "Who said that I did it?" Dean asked. Sergei pointed to the words on the ground. "Didn't you write it yourself? Even if you want to clear your suspicion and deliberately put yourself in the most dangerous position, the Holy Church may not believe it. Moreover, they will see your name when they don't have a clue. What do you think they will think?" "Someone will help us prove it," Dean said and turned to leave. Sergei was startled as he looked at Gwyneth. Gwyneth's eyes lit up as she shook her head and followed Dean. Sergei touched the back of his head in a daze. Dean's castle. Many reporters and interviewers from various news agencies lined up along the spacious and clear riverside. They lined up along the riverside path straight to the gate of the castle. Whispers rose and fell, and it was extremely lively. "You can't go in." "I said you can't go in. Our young master is studying the invention. Who dares to break into his private mansion? Do you want to go to the magistrate?" Noise, Sandro, and the 4 knights from the Rhine castle were blocking the entrance of the castle. They were blocking the reporters who wanted to break into the castle. The scene was very noisy. Old Feline was sitting on a chair in the hall of the castle. From time to time, he would look through the window at the distance outside the gate. There was a bit of anxiety in his eyes. He had been doing this for 2 or 3 days. Every day, he was hoping that someone would send a message from the giant wall. However, his expectation was always disappointed. His ears were filled with annoyance and stuffy noises. "Patriarch, you should go upstairs and rest." Crone came to Old Fouline's side. "I'll inform you when a young master comes back." Old Fouline shook his head and sighed. "I'll wait for him here. You go and help to deal with the flies outside." Crone glanced at him, sighed, and turned to leave. A moment later, the exhausted Sandro returned to the hall while wiping his sweat. He sat down on a chair and massaged his sore arms. Jake, who was sitting in the hall, glanced at him cautiously and mumbled, "When is this young master coming back? Is he really like what the newspapers say? If that's the case, aren't we going to be his scapegoats?" When Sandro heard this, he turned around and glared at him. He berated, "Shut up, you bastard." Jake trembled in fear and hastily shut his mouth. If it was before, he naturally wouldn't be afraid of his elder brother. But now, because of his mistakes, the Ryan family had declined to such an extent that he couldn't raise his head. Sandro looked at Jake with disgust. He felt that it was a shame to have the same father as Jake. He stood up and walked in front of old Feline. "Father, we can't get in touch with him. If we continue to sit and wait for death, then Melon Consortium will attack us. I'm afraid that he won't be able to help us even if he comes back." Old Feline looked at his son. In just a few days, there were white hairs on his temples. He sighed. "The greatest contribution we can do for him is to do nothing. Once we step out of the castle, Melon Consortium will grab hold of our weakness. They will twist us into a sword and attack him. We can only wait. As long as the barbarians don't attack, then we will have hope." There was sadness in Sandro's eyes. "I'm afraid that we may not be able to hold out until the barbarians attack. They have already created public opinion in the newspaper that Mr. Dean had secretly sold information to the barbarians. He also used his authority as an architect to sell inventions to the barbarians. So the barbarians were able to break through King King's fortress. How can the civilians know about this? Many of them believe it. Moreover, the military newspaper reported that the barbarians had confessed a lot of secrets. Moreover, the barbarians confessed to Mr. Dean. I believe that Mr. Dean would never do such a thing. It must be a trap set up by the Melon Consortium." Old Feline smiled. "Who doesn't know about such tricks? Probably only the good civilians don't know about it." Sandro said, "Fortunately, the Scott Consortium and the Holy Church stopped the military from capturing Mr. Dean. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to find Mr. Dean and the charges would be confirmed. But right now, the Radiant Church and the Scott Financial Group aren't strong enough to stop these rumors. Who knows when the military will send more people over? Let's pray." Old Feline closed his eyes. Melon Consortium. Conference hall. Mark, the patriarch of the Mel family, was sitting at the head of the conference table. Rudolph of the Bourron family was sitting on his right side. This change happened more than a month ago. Now the Mel family had the veto power in the consortium. In other words, they occupied 51% of the shares. It was no longer the same as in the past where the Bourron family and the rest of the families mixed together to form a three-legged tripod. This was a heavy blow to the Bourron family. In other words, it would be difficult for them to come up with a solution even if they united all the remaining families. The entire Melon Consortium was completely dominated by the Mel family. Mel family held the absolute administrative power. "Patriarch Kinson, your daughter has just turned 16 this year. I don't think she can participate in such a meeting at such an age. Please don't misunderstand. I'm doing this for Miss Sarah's sake. She is so beautiful and intelligent. A girl at her age should be in the piano room or listening to the music of the White Swan." A middle-aged man with a big belly said with a smile. Mark smiled as he looked at Rudolph. Sarah, who was sitting on Mark's left side, smiled. "I think it's an extreme failure to judge a person's talent by age. Not to mention that I'm not young anymore. By the way, my piano skills have passed the 6th grade. I learned it from teacher Jack of White Swan. How is your daughter's practice?" The middle-aged man wasn't angry at all. He laughed and said, "How can my daughter be compared to you? I'm just sad that you were brought to this kind of environment by your father at such a young age. This is a world that will shatter a beautiful childhood. You have to be careful. If the broken thing is fake, then I don't need it." Sarah Mel smiled indifferently. Her tone was very calm. There was no trace of restraint. Everyone's eyes flashed as they quietly observed the girl who rarely entered their line of sight. "Well, let's get down to business." Mark clapped his hands. "According to the information we have gathered, the barbarians will launch an attack in 1 or 2 days. It's time for us to act." A man who was sitting next to Rudolph asked, "Our consortium can inquire about the military decisions of the barbarians?" Mark smiled. "There is nothing we can inquire about as long as we are willing to spend money. Our consortium has lost a lot of people and money in order to get this information. But everything is worth it. Chapter 355. Please. Mark looked at Rudolph next to him and smiled at the man. The man nodded. Now that the border war is about to erupt, our financial group has poured all of our resources into this war. We've also taken this opportunity to drag down the apostle of the temple who has a bad relationship with our financial group. Everything is going according to plan. However, I heard that after this war is over, our financial group will form an alliance with the Scott Financial Group. Alliance? With Scott Financial Group? The people on both sides of the conference table were a little surprised. They looked at each other, and some of them laughed out loud. Mark frowned. Is it because of my age that I have auditory hallucinations? How can you say such absurd things? I really doubt that you came from the inner wall. The man smiled and said, Patriarch Kinson, you must be joking. I only heard it from others and thought that it was Patriarch Kinson's new strategic deployment. But now it seems like it was nothing. Mark replied, What did you hear? Keep a close eye on people who deliberately spread rumors that are unfavorable to our consortium. I want to see which consortium would spread such stupid rumors. The man said respectfully, Yes, I will do it even if you don't say it. Mount Erdos in the castle. After the consortium meeting, Rudolph sat in the carriage and went straight back to the castle. He didn't exchange greetings with the other nobles along the way. He took off his coat and gave it to the maid. He took off his hat and threw it into the maid's arms. The maid was so scared that she almost dropped the exquisite hat to the ground. Master, the butler came up to him. Miss wants to see you. I don't have time. Rudolph quickly entered the hall and went upstairs. You're not free, but I am. A figure stepped out from the corner of the second floor and stopped in front of Rudolph. She was wearing a green floral skirt. It was Jenny. Rudolph stared at her for a moment, then turned and walked past her into his office. Jenny immediately followed him into the room. She waited for him to sit down. She threw a newspaper on the desk. Father, if I'm not wrong, then this newspaper belongs to a news agency under the Mellon Consortium. Why? You promised me that as long as I don't see him again, you won't hurt him again. Why? Rudolph's eyes slowly moved from the newspaper cover to his daughter's face. He looked at her deeply and indifferently said, There is no reason. The newspaper is very clear. Father, Jenny bit her lips and said, Do you think such a fake thing can convince others? He is the most promising person in the Temple of Elements. As long as he is willing, the other 6 consortiums, including our Mellon Consortium and other wealthy businessmen, are willing to spend a lot of money to make friends with him. Is he short of money? No shortage. How could he do such a thing? Rudolph was expressionless. Money doesn't mean power. Maybe he wants revenge? No, impossible. Jenny stared at him. I know him. He wouldn't do such a stupid thing. Rudolph indifferently said, Nothing is impossible. He has been in Thornflower Prison for more than 3 years. Who knows what kind of changes have occurred in his mind in such an environment? If you say that he doesn't hate me, will you believe it? Will I believe it? Hearing this sharp rhetorical question, Jenny was a little absent-minded, but very quickly she focused her gaze and looked at her father seriously. Hate. He will hate you. He should hate you. You wronged him. But even if he wants to retaliate against us, he won't use such means. How many casualties will it cause? He can't be so cold-blooded. I believe him. Rudolph raised his eyelids and stared at her eyes. After a moment, his eyes slowly fell back to the newspaper. If he had the status he has today, then I wouldn't object to you being together. I was wrong 3 years ago, but I won't this time. You can't imagine what kind of change a person will have after staying in Thornflower Prison for 3 years. Maybe. Rudolph suddenly became silent as he said the word maybe. He slowly said, It's useless to tell me about this because I didn't participate in this matter. I believe that he didn't collude with the barbarians, but he is not the ignorant teenager from 3 years ago. Oh no, he wasn't ignorant 3 years ago. He was able to destroy an intermediate hunter's hunting team with the strength of a primary hunter. His cunning is beyond our imagination. You should stay away from him in the future. Jenny was startled. Suddenly, she received a message and her eyes widened. You weren't involved in this matter? Then, it was planned by that playmate of yours since you were a child. Rudolph looked at her and frowned. You should know that our family's position in the Mellon Consortium is deteriorating. We have offended the architect. Mel family has attacked us in many places. Our shares in the consortium have fallen to less than 30%. The Mel family is the dominant family in the entire Mellon Consortium. Today, the butcher Kinson let his daughter attend the meeting room. Although I knew that this little girl was like her grandfather, but I didn't expect her to be more insidious than I had imagined. She has full control over the kid. Even a famous tycoon would lose his fortune and be imprisoned in prison. Humph. Rudolph looked up at her and frowned. You should know that our family's position in the Mellon Consortium is getting worse and worse. Moreover, we have offended the architect who is in the limelight. The Mel family has attacked too many places. Now our shares in the consortium have fallen to less than 30%. Jenny couldn't believe it. Are you talking about Saya? How could this be? How could Saya enter the meeting hall? Isn't she playing around all day? She doesn't go to parties, concerts, or piano lessons. How could she do all these things? Rudolph sighed. It seems that the little girl's mind is higher than I thought. She has learned to disguise herself since childhood. Jenny stared at him. Her mind was buzzing. She was confused. Some pictures flashed through her mind. Suddenly, she woke up and bitterly said, It turned out to be like this. I felt that she was different from other girls since she was a child. She knew everything. She once said that playing the piano and writing poems were the pursuit of mediocre people. Her ideal was to fill the entire giant wall with wealth and then stand on top of the Golden Tower to look at the scenery outside the giant wall. Rudolph was slightly startled. How old was she when she said that? Jenny replied, It seems to be when she was 8 years old. That year we talked about each other's dreams. When I heard her words, I thought that she was deliberately exaggerating her joke. Now it seems that what she really loves is not poetry, but what she has now. Rudolph was silent for a moment. He sighed. Her pursuit is very similar to her grandfather. If that old guy George was only 20 years old and energetic, then it is estimated that in 30 years the entire giant wall will be filled with the wealth of the Mel family. But he looked at Jenny with a trace of gentleness in his eyes. Your life is more meaningful compared to them. I am better than them in raising a daughter. Jenny saw the gratification in her father's eyes. She bit her lower lip and whispered, Father, is what you said true? Yes. On the wilderness plain outside the fortress, Dean took Gwyneth and Sergei to move forward quickly. They crossed mountains and ridges. Along the way, they killed the mutated monsters that blocked their way. There were even rotting undeads among them. It seemed that they were explorers who came out of the giant wall to search for materials in the radiation zone. Chapter 356. Dean didn't pay attention to him as he followed the familiar terrain to the hiding place of Splitter. He had stayed outside the giant wall for 7 or 8 days. He didn't know whether Splitter had starved to death or not. 10 minutes later, Dean came to the plain where Splitter was hiding. He looked at Sergei and Gwyneth. You wait for me here. I'll be back soon. He carried the bag of mutant beasts that he had hunted along the way and quickly left the plain. Sergei shrugged his shoulders and sat on the ground. He pulled out a stalk of grass and put it in his mouth. He softly hummed a tune as he looked at Gwyneth. Don't look at it. This guy must be hiding some secrets that he doesn't want us to know. Oomph. I don't care. Gwyneth glanced at him. Hunters are brainless like you. Our work is much easier. Sergei raised his eyebrows. Like me? If they were all like me, they would have wiped out your stupid magistrate's court a long time ago. There's so many bad guys in the world, but you don't catch them. Instead, you catch us, who have no background or backing. I don't believe that those consortiums and nobles don't have any shady dealings. You guys know this too, but didn't you turn a blind eye to it? You waited until the truth was exposed before putting on a show. Gwyneth sneered. Ignorant. That's why I'm fearless. Huh. Sergei pulled out the stalk of grass from his mouth and stabbed forward. Gwyneth rolled her eyes. Childish. Dean went into the woods and looked back. He saw that Sergei and Gwyneth didn't move. He went to the abandoned building behind the woods. He looked at the bottom of the building and saw a faint red dot. He was relieved. He jumped into the basement and saw the tungsten cage. Splitter was sleeping inside. It slightly raised its eyelids when it heard Dean's movement. I knew that you wouldn't starve to death so easily. Dean smiled. He opened the backpack and took out the mutant beast. He cut it and threw it into the cage. Splitter's spirit was aroused as soon as it smelled the blood. It opened its mouth and pounced on the bloody corpse of the mutated beast. Dean saw its panicked appearance. He smiled as he fed it. I'll take you outside the giant wall to play. Your younger brothers and sisters are stronger than you. I'll raise you to waist. The little Splitter was engrossed in eating. It didn't pay attention to the human's mutterings. Dean didn't stay long after feeding the Splitter. He went out of the woods and returned to Sergei and Gwyneth. Both of them had their backs to each other. It seemed that they didn't want to see each other. Dean said, "Get ready to go." He looked at the sky above his head. His eyes flashed as he took the lead to go to a place in front of them. Sergei patted his butt and followed them. He looked at Dean. "Master, why are you always looking at the sky? If it rains, we will find a place to hide. What's there to worry about? You can't avoid some rain." What do you mean? Can you not beat around the bush when talking to someone with my IQ? Dean ignored them and moved forward quickly. It didn't take long for him to reach the hill he had passed last time when he returned to the fortress. He turned around and came to a steep wall on the top of the hill, which was covered with moss. He looked at it for a moment and then reached out to explore it. "Master, you are—" Sergei didn't finish his words as he saw Dean push away the moss-covered rock wall. There was a cave inside. Sergei was surprised and immediately followed. Dean came to the cave and saw some primitive human utensils. There were stone bowls and bonfires. There was a barbecue rack on top of the bonfires and a stone barrel. The smell of rotten salt and rotten meat wafted out of the barrel. Dean glanced at it and frowned. In this rough stone barrel, he saw half an arm and a few fingers. Sergei and Gwyneth came in together. Gwyneth was silent like a shadow. Sergei looked around vigilantly. After seeing that there were no enemies, he relaxed and looked towards the source of the disgusting smell. He saw the wet salt and the soup stains on the stone bucket. He raised his eyebrows and said, "These barbarians are just like the legends. They even eat people. I don't know if they're locked together with the undead. Who will be able to bite who?" Sergei's eyes revealed a playful smile. It seemed that he wanted to try it out. Gwyneth glanced at him but didn't say anything. Dean looked around and found that there was a lot of dust on the utensils used by the barbarians. He saw a black beast horn that had fallen from the rock wall. He picked it up and looked at Sergei and Gwyneth. "Do you recognize it?" Sergei shrugged. Gwyneth replied, "I don't know." Dean looked at it. He thought that during the cold weapon period, or in some remote and backward towns, animal horns were often made into horns. Was this also a horn? He wiped off the dust and blew on it. Immediately, a sound rang out. Fortunately, he didn't use too much strength. The sound stopped just after it rang out. I didn't expect it to really be a bugle horn. The barbarian seems to have already left this base. It seems like it's about to begin as I expected. Dean put away the horn, turned away from the cave, and continued to move forward. Sergei and Gwyneth followed him. The three of them arrived at the king's fortress after a few hours. This fortress has actually been breached? Has the barbarian army reached the commercial district? Is the war over? Sergei was shocked to see the ruined fortress in the distance. Dean said, "This is the king's fortress." "Ah, the one that was breached by the barbarians. I thought that the other fortresses had been breached. It scared me." Sergei patted his chest. Dean glanced at him. "Can't you even recognize the fortress?" "I've never been to this fortress. Why would I pay attention to these fortresses? They all look the same," Sergei confidently said. Dean rolled his eyes. He raised his hand to stop them. "Let's find a place to hide. There's a thick bush in front of us. It's a good place to hide." Sergei pointed. Dean whispered, "There is someone there." Sergei was startled. He immediately bent down and slowly retreated. After a moment, Dean found a place to hide. He sat on the ground and looked up at the sky. Sergei and Gwyneth squatted next to him. "Master, aren't we going to sneak into the fortress? What are we doing here?" "Waiting for the wind." Chapter 357. Commercial District, the middle gate of the protective wall. Auburn was leaning on the edge of the city wall, looking at the distant sky. Where the sky and the earth were connected in a line, a dark cloud of radiation was rolling in, swallowing the light between the sky and the earth. The wind from the black clouds was mixed with the smell of blood. He squinted slightly, and his dark golden eyes flashed with light. General, a blond, handsome adjutant, walked over from behind. He placed his palm on his chest and saluted. "Everything is ready. We can start the battle at any time." Auburn nodded, but didn't look back. Adjutant Junlang slowly raised his head and looked at the legendary figure in awe. The latter was the commander-in-chief of this battle. He had just turned 40 years old and had already obtained 5 general stars. He was the youngest 5-star general in the military headquarters and also the person he respected the most. He considered his words and said in awe, "General, will these barbarians really attack in the next 2 days? They have occupied the Red Maple Mountain Range for 7 or 8 days and have not made any moves. In my opinion, they can enter the stronghold. There are abundant water sources and resources here. Are they satisfied?" Auburn slowly replied, "I also hope that they know how to be satisfied. But if these beasts are satisfied, then they won't sacrifice so many people to capture the fortress. They won't break into our territory. Their appetite won't be satisfied with this place. Even the entire outer wall may not be able to fill their stomach." Adjutant Junlang was startled. He lowered his head and said, "If they want to attack, will they attack from the slums or the protective wall of the residential area? We don't have too many troops there. I'm afraid that we will lose our defense if they attack from there. Don't worry, we have the boundary wall. Even if they break through the residential district and the slums, it will be useless. Instead, they will fall into a more disadvantageous environment." Auburn calmly said, "Go and check the barracks again. Tell them to be alert and get ready for the war. The war will begin when the thunder sounds." "Thunder?" Adjutant Junlang was startled. He was puzzled. Suddenly, he thought of something. His face slightly changed as he retreated. Outside the fortress, near the giant wall, a group of knights in silver-white armor appeared in front of a stronghold. Among them, a handsome youth of 16 or 17 suddenly twitched his nose twice. His expression greatly changed as he quickly ran forward. Seeing this, the captain frowned slightly and called for the others to follow. Very soon, everyone arrived in front of the stronghold. Their expressions changed and turned a little ugly. "Bastard, it's really as the intelligence said. They were completely wiped out. Damn bastard." A few of the team members started cursing. Captain Kalen glanced around, his face covered with a layer of frost, and said, "Quickly go and see if there are any survivors." Yes. The few of them immediately dispersed and went to various parts of the stronghold to rummage through the corpses on the ground that were suspected to be alive. A few minutes later, the handsome youth shouted from a high wall of the stronghold, "Captain, come quickly. There is a survivor here." Kalen, who was rummaging through the corpses, quickly put down the corpses in his hands. He turned around and ran to the side of the handsome youth. He saw that the handsome youth was holding a primary knight of light in his arms. The latter's neck had a deep blood stain. He didn't know how he was still alive. Kalen was surprised and happy at the same time. He quickly took out a bottle of water from his waist and handed it to the youth. "Wake up. Who killed you?" "We are the people from the investigation team." The young knight, whose throat had been cut, weakly opened his eyes and uttered a few indistinct grunts. Kalen quickly put his ear closer to the youth. "Yes." The voice stopped abruptly. Kalen waited for a few seconds, but didn't see any follow-up. He couldn't help but look up and saw that the youth's neck was crooked. He was dead. Ah, bastard. Kalen was going crazy. He punched the ground. The handsome youth's face turned ugly. He slowly put down the corpse and said, "Captain, this person only has a wound on his throat. The rest of the corpses are full of wounds. When I found him, there was a person on top of him. I think it is because of this that he was not confirmed to be dead. The murderer is so meticulous. After killing them, he still calmly confirmed to be dead. It should not be the work of one person." Kalen slowly stood up. The other team members also quickly ran over and reported, "Captain, there are no survivors. They're all dead." Kalen's eyes were gloomy. "If there are no survivors, let the dead speak. You guys go and look at the wounds on the corpses. Then look for any clues about the murderer. Cole, remember the smell of the scene. When we find the suspect, you will confirm it." "Yes." The handsome youth solemnly nodded. The other team members also went to do their own things. "Captain," suddenly a woman's voice echoed from the distance. "There is a clue." Kalen was startled for a moment before his eyes lit up. He quickly rushed over and directly jumped down from the 20-meter-high rampart. His palms quickly slapped the wall to dissipate the force of the fall. After landing, he flipped over and rolled a few times on the ground before getting up and rushing over to a corpse in front of him. Squatting beside the corpse was a young woman with an oval face and a look of surprise and doubt. Kalen's heart shivered as he saw the clothes of the corpse. He recognized that it was a 3-merit knight and also a guardian of the stronghold. "Here, there are words." The young woman pointed as she saw Kalen. Kalen looked over. "The murderer is Dean?" The young woman was at a loss as she heard Kalen's murmur. "Captain, is he talking about Dean from the Temple of Elements? Or someone else with the same name and surname?" Kalen frowned and looked around the corpse for a moment. Suddenly, he exclaimed in surprise, his eyes revealing a thoughtful look. These words shouldn't have been written by him, but added after his death. The young woman was stunned. She took a closer look and suddenly realized, yes, no wonder I always felt that something was wrong. These words are written so deeply, and it's different from the way he was lying down. As she said that, she lay down on the grass a few meters away from the corpse and tried to write with her finger a few centimeters above the corpse's head. Although she could write with her finger, the posture made her feel awkward and difficult. Why would a seriously injured person use such a difficult posture to write his last message? She quickly climbed up and squatted in front of the body regardless of the dust on her body. "Captain, it seems that someone wants to borrow our hands to deliberately frame the person named Dean. Moreover, this person should be the architect of the Temple of Elements. The forces that want to deal with him must be extremely strong. Only such forces can quietly kill everyone here. Moreover, they have the time to slowly wipe out the evidence and destroy the wounds." Kalen frowned. "Don't rush to a conclusion. It is possible that the thief shouted to chase the thief. At present, we can be sure that the person who killed him wrote the words on the back of his fingers. There is sand in his nails. The person who killed him wrote the words in a deep way so that we can see them. The wind and sand couldn't cover them for a while. This proves that he didn't write it himself." The young woman said, "Captain, judging from the condition of these corpses, they died less than 3 hours ago. Why don't we first find the fatal wounds on these corpses and then restore the battle scene before they died to see how many murderers there were?" "All right," Kayla nodded. "Go." The young woman immediately set off and went back to the barrier. An hour later, "Captain, from the information we got from the scene, there should be 3 murderers without a doubt. There are traces of 3 people climbing rocks outside the barrier. There are traces of squatting in the grass in the distance. I'm afraid that 3 people can kill the entire barrier. I'm afraid that all of them are at the level of 3 merit knights. The magistrate won't do such a thing in the entire outer wall. The military is preparing for war, so they shouldn't be distracted to kill the people of our stronghold. The biggest suspects are the aristocratic consortiums and the devil apostles of the Dark Church." A middle-aged blond man said. From the color of his hair, it was obvious that he was an aristocrat. However, he didn't have the slightest bias towards the aristocracy when analyzing the problem. Kalen nodded. "We have to narrow the scope. According to the handwriting found by Alan, no matter who wrote the words, the murderer is related to Dean. There's a 90% chance that Dean is the genius architect. Either he was the murderer or was his enemy. Cole, go and find architect Dean. Smell his scent and see if it is consistent with the smell of the murderer. Alan, go and investigate the consortiums that have a secret dispute with Dean. As for the others, Follow me to check if the dark church wants to take the opportunity to frame our architect. Yes. Everyone responded in unison. Boom! All of a sudden, a thunderous sound exploded above everyone's head. Everyone couldn't help but look up. The sky was dark. Dark clouds were floating from the direction of the giant wall. It seemed that a rainstorm was coming. Now was the beginning of the black snow season. After the rainstorm, the temperature would quickly turn cold. The real black snow season would arrive. Rumble. As the crowd looked up, the lightning bolts dashed through the dark clouds like thick lightning snakes. Kaylin's face changed. Damn it, the young woman called Alan said. Move the bodies into the barrier and protect the traces of the scene. Don't let the rain wash away the traces. The others reacted and acted in a hurry. It's a bad time. Kaylin clenched his teeth. It's the right time. Dean looked up at the sky. There was a smile on his face as he heard the rolling thunder in the distance. He slowly stood up from the grass and looked at Gwyneth and Sergei. Our battle is about to begin. The clown should step down. Now it's time for the protagonist to come on stage. Sergei was surprised. Battle? Are we going to join the war? We have to bring out our weapons before the battle. Dean smiled as he looked at the ruins of the king's fort. He waved to the two and turned away. He avoided the sentinels lurking on the ground. He came to a remote fort. There were only a few soldiers on duty. They were barely maintaining the basic operation of the fort. Dean went to a remote place. He dug the sand and took off his hunter's coat. He buried it in the sand. Sergei and Gwyneth saw Dudian's signal and took off their coats. Dean took the lead to sneak into the fort after burying the coat in the sand. Sergei and Gwyneth were surprised as they understood Dean's idea. They followed him and sneaked into the fort. Whoosh! Dean took the lead and went straight ahead. Dudian, Sergei and Gwyneth returned to the town behind the fortress. The town was empty and the streets were empty. There were chickens, ducks, and other poultry in the back of the houses. They were making screeching noises. Everyone has taken refuge behind the guardian wall. They are running fast. Sergei smiled as he walked on the street. Gwyneth looked from side to side in silence, like a passerby who had nothing to do with it. Dean picked a house and was about to change his clothes. He was startled and turned to look at the eighth house on the left. His brows suddenly wrinkled as if he suddenly noticed something. He immediately turned and walked toward the house. Sergei and Gwyneth were startled as they followed him. Dudian kicked open the door of the house and entered. He quickly found a corridor leading to the basement. He jumped down and saw a few linen bags piled up in the corner. There was a barrel of wine on the other side. Everything seemed to be normal, but he saw two red lights in the linen bags. He immediately went over and grabbed one of the bags. He threw it to the ground. Ouch! A woman screamed in pain. Puff! The linen bag next to the bag was torn open and a dagger stabbed towards Dean's face. Dean grabbed the wrist that was holding the dagger. It was a 7 or 8-year-old boy. He had freckles on his face and brown hair. His face was full of surprise and horror. Dean frowned as he exerted some force on his wrist. The boy released the dagger in pain. Dean threw the dagger to the ground and turned to look at the figure that came out of another linen bag. It was a 5 or 6-year-old girl. She had light green hair and wheat white skin. Her eyes were huge and cute. Brother, are you okay? The girl saw the boy fall and quickly crawled over. The boy rubbed his buttocks and elbow. He hugged the girl and bit his lower lip. His face was full of horror. His legs were trembling, but his face was full of courage. He didn't even dare to blink. Sergei and Gwyneth came down from the stairs. They were surprised to see the little brother and sister. Chapter 358. The boy's face turned pale as he heard Sergei's words. He stopped the little girl and said in a trembling voice, "You don't come over. I'm very powerful. Don't come over." Sergei smiled. Blame yourself for seeing something you shouldn't have seen. Sergei's burly body approached the two of them. He stretched out his palms and lifted the boy's head. The little boy desperately beat his arms in pain. His facial features were distorted in pain. The little girl standing behind him was frightened. She hurriedly hugged Sergei's thigh and begged, "Uncle, I beg you, don't hurt my brother. I beg you." Sergei kicked the girl away. She hit the wall behind her and fell to the ground. She couldn't get up for a long time. "Leave them," Dudian suddenly said. Sergei turned to look at him. "Leave them? They have seen our people. Although I don't know what your plan is, but they will certainly make trouble for us if the news leaks out." Dudian walked over and carried the boy to the side. The boy was still in shock as he looked at Dudian. He turned and ran to the little girl. "Sister, sister." He helped the little girl up. Dudian came to the front of the two. "Are you siblings?" The boy looked up at Dudian's face. He couldn't see the slightest trace of anger on Dudian's face. He nervously replied, "Yes, yes." "Really?" The boy's heart tightened. "I'm not too sure. My sister has been with me since I was very young." Dudian nodded. "What about your parents?" "My father passed away a long time ago. My mother died of illness 2 years ago." Dudian said, "Everyone else in the village has gone to take refuge. Why are you still here?" "There is an entrance fee to enter the city behind the wall. I have no money, so we can only hide here," the boy nervously replied. Sergei sneered and said, "You need money to enter the city? How much is that? No matter how poor you two brats are, you should be able to fork out a few copper coins, right? If you really can't fork out the money, you could just sell some of the things here that you didn't take away. You're really stupid." When the boy heard his voice, his face turned pale, and he hurriedly said, "No, it's not enough. In the past, the entrance fee was only 2 copper coins. Now that I heard that there are barbarians coming, the entrance fee has increased. Each person has to pay 10 silver coins. Although the things here are valuable, the owner of the pawn shop has already left. There's no place to sell them, unless we go to another town. But the journey is long, and if we meet wild beasts or savages." Sergei frowned and didn't say anything. Dean looked down at the two. "If you are willing, I still need 2 servants to take care of your food and clothing." The boy was surprised. He looked up at Dean and hesitated for a moment. I am afraid that we are clumsy." "It's okay to be stupid. You can learn." The boy turned to look at the little girl, gritted his teeth, and said resolutely, "We are willing. Please take us in." After saying that, he pulled the little girl and kowtowed to the ground. Dean didn't stop them. He saw that the boy didn't raise his head. "Get up. But from now on, you don't have to kneel to anyone, including me." The boy pulled the little girl to stand up. He nodded as he heard Dean's words. Dean asked, "What are your names?" "My name is Gabriel." The boy pointed to the little girl. "My sister's name is Artemis." Dudian looked at the boy. "Bandage the wound and let's go." Gabriel hurriedly said as he saw Dean turn around, "Elder." "Huh? Can you wait for us? We had to pack up our luggage." Gabriel nervously said. Sergei sneered, "Untactful little brat. What's the point of packing up your junk? From now on, the leftovers of your food are more expensive than the best things you have seen. Do you understand?" Gabriel looked at Sergei in fear, but summoned up the courage to speak to Dean's back. "Elder, my parents left us a token at home. I want to get it, please. Go." Dudian agreed. Gabriel was overjoyed and hurriedly pulled Artemis along with her. Dean and the other two followed behind Gabriel and Sergei. They came to a laundry creek behind the town. There were several slabs on both sides of the creek. Occasionally 1 or 2 small fish could be seen swimming down the creek. On the hillside behind the stream, a shabby wooden shack sat alone. Gabriel saw that her sister was injured, so she asked her to wait at the foot of the hill while she climbed up the hill to the shack and entered it. After a few minutes, she came out, holding a small bundle in her hand, and ran down the hill quickly. "Elder, I'm ready," Gabriel respectfully said as he led Artemis to Dean. Dean looked at the bag in Gabriel's arms and nodded slightly. He turned away. Dean looked for a few sets of clothes in the town. He asked Sergei and Gwyneth to carry Gabriel on their backs. They quickly went to the left gate of the guardian wall. Dean smeared a little charcoal on his face, pressed the bridge of his nose, and gently pulled it down. With a click, the bridge of his nose collapsed, and his whole appearance suddenly changed greatly. He looked mediocre and inconspicuous. Sergei and Gwyneth also used the same method to adjust their appearance. Gabriel and her Kate were stunned by this skill. Their small faces were full of surprise. "Stop!" The guard stopped Dean and others. Dean was prepared as he took out the badge of the Ryan family. When the guard saw the pattern on the metal, He recognized it as the emblem of a noble family. His expression immediately changed. He bowed and smiled apologetically. "So it's my lord. Please, please." He immediately stepped aside. Dean took the lead to enter the city and rented a small hotel. He asked Sergei and Gwyneth to bandage the wounds of Gabriel and Artemis. "Stay here and don't expose your traces." "What about you?" Sergei asked. "I'm going to the temple." Dean pushed open the window of the hotel and saw dark clouds hanging over his head. The hazy weather was depressing. It was estimated that many people were out of breath due to the pressure of such weather. "Go to the temple?" Sergei frowned. Gwyneth, who had been silent, said, "Do you want us to sneak back and inform the Ryan family? Although they have declined, but at least they can help us to inquire about the situation." Dean shook his head. "The enemy will keep an eye on them if they want to deal with us. At this time, we will expose our traces." Sergei looked at Dean. "Do you want to deal with the Melon Consortium by yourself?" Chapter 359. The rain finally came. The first rain after entering the black snow season poured down amidst the rolling thunder. The heavy rain instantly became a curtain, covering the sky and the earth, filling the low-lying areas of some dilapidated roads in the slums and residential areas. The people in the slums seemed to be facing a battle of life and death. They blocked the doors with sandbags to prevent the rain from spreading into their homes. No one expected the drainage system that had not been repaired for many years to play any role at this moment. All the soldiers on the wall were wearing military raincoats. They were facing the torrential rain in their respective posts, but their line of sight had long been blurred by the rain. It was difficult to see far away. "General, the rain is too heavy. You go in first." Adjutant June Lang said to Auburn, who was standing on the wall in a raincoat. Auburn's face was gloomy. "The war is about to begin. You want me to go back?" Immediately passed down the order to everyone. "Brace yourselves and prepare for battle." When Adjutant June Lang heard this, he said in shock, "Battle? Will these barbarians really?" "Go!" Auburn shouted. Adjutant June Lang hurriedly turned and ran away. After a moment, an intelligence officer galloped to the front of Auburn. "General, there is a situation in the front. The barbarians of the Red Maple Mountains have begun to march towards the Golden Wall. They are very fast and are rushing towards the Golden Wall." The protective wall of the commercial district was also known as the Golden Wall. The residential area was known as the Silver Wall. The slums were known as the Bronze Wall. Auburn's eyes flashed coldly. "Tell everyone to prepare waterproof measures for the gods' artillery. Prepare for battle." "Yes." The messenger turned and left. Auburn narrowed his eyes as he looked at the white curtain of rain in front of him. He clenched his fists. Rumble. On the desolate plains, there was a dense black ocean that quickly engulfed the plains and dyed the earth black. The army marched towards the Golden Wall at a moderate speed. After all, they were still dozens of miles away from the Golden Wall. They needed to conserve their energy. Whoosh, whoosh. Outside the grassland on both sides of the army, some figures were hiding in the grass, secretly peeping at the vast group of savages. They were shocked. In their impression, savages were crude and primitive monsters that did not understand human language and did not understand human etiquette. However, at this moment, it seemed that these savages were actually wearing excellent armor and holding sharp and shiny weapons. They were just like excellent lions. Boom! Loud rumbling sounds could be heard coming from the dark and surging barbarians. Giant monsters about 7 to 8 meters tall were jumping around. They looked like toads, and they were covered in leather, scales, and other protective gear. It was obvious that they had been tamed and listened to orders. Dean changed his clothes in the hotel. He carried a bag full of papers on his back and hired a carriage. He drove to the station in the next block. He changed to another carriage and went to the Decca Mountain. Dean got off the carriage after he arrived at Church Mountain. He paid the fare and walked along the mountain road with an umbrella. There was no one on the road due to the rainy weather. The guard stopped him when he came to the castle. He was scared when he saw Dean's face. "It's architect, Dean." It's raining so much. Why did you come here? I've just produced an invention. I'm going to test it. Dean indifferently replied. The guard was surprised. Invention? Haven't you already published your lightning rod divine art? It's a new invention, Dean said. The guard's eyes widened. New invention? He wasn't surprised when an architect produced a new invention. But who was in front of him? He was a genius who had produced a series of high-level inventions. Every new invention caused a huge sensation. When he recovered, he saw that Dean had gone far into the castle. He was stunned for half a second, and then suddenly reacted. He hurried back to his guard room, picked up a pen, and wrote a letter. He wanted to be the first to pass the news. Dean came to his own building after entering the castle. Dean shook off the water stains on the umbrella. He leaned against the door and went into a room on the second floor. He came to a bookcase and took out some books. There was a roll of white paper inside. He took out the paper and slowly spread it out. There was an extremely precise and meticulous pattern on it. The era of steam has begun from this moment, Dean whispered as he slowly closed the paper. He opened the bag and took out the blank paper. He put the paper into the bag and left the room. He went downstairs and shook the umbrella. He went out in the heavy rain and went to the temple. Dean saw a lot of people inside the temple. It seemed that they weren't wearing umbrellas as they were trapped by the heavy rain. They were sitting in various places and quietly reading books. Dean put the umbrella by the door and came to the counter. A young woman wearing a scarf was sitting behind the counter. She was wearing the clothes of an intermediate architect. She had a sweet smile on her face. She sat up straight as she saw Dean. "Are you here to submit your invention?" Dean took out the papyrus from the bag on his back and looked at her. "Yes, this is my invention paper." The young woman was stunned when she saw Dean's appearance. Her eyes widened. You're Mr. Dean?" Dean made a hushed gesture and blinked his eyes. "Mr. Dew, can I have your signature?" The girl immediately understood. She was a little excited and carefully took the paper. "Mr. Dew, can I have your signature?" "Yes." After a moment, Dean left the temple after completing the procedures. Dean left the Temple of Elements after leaving the temple. He sat in the carriage and returned to his castle. The rain was pouring down, and the raindrops created ripples on the surface of the Tyza River. The reporters from the various news agencies lined up by the riverside waiting to enter the castle were all forced back by the heavy rain. At this moment, the riverside was empty, but looking from afar, there were still a few sporadic reporters hiding outside the castle to take shelter from the rain. Their professionalism was evident. Those annoying flies are finally gone. Jake craned his neck to look outside the window. He heaved a sigh of relief and complained. Old Feline looked at the heavy rain. It's not easy for him to move around outside the giant wall. He should be ready to go back. Sander nodded and called a servant to bring a roll of thick blanket. He put on Old Feline's knees. "Father, the weather is cold. Don't catch a cold. You should go back upstairs." Chapter 360. The carriage drove into the castle. Several newspaper reporters who were hiding outside the castle were surprised to see the carriage. They were keen to smell the smell of excitement. One of them took out a notebook to record. The door was pushed open. Dudian came down from the carriage with an umbrella. He stepped on a muddy path and entered the castle. The newspaper reporters' eyes widened as they saw the face of Dudian, who had been missing for a long time. They didn't expect that the person who was at the cusp of the storm would appear at this moment. They rushed over and hid in front of the castle. They didn't care about the rain splashing on their hair and suits. They held the notebook and bowed to Dudian. "Mr. Dean, Architect Dean, we are Jane." Several people gathered in front of Dean. One of them grabbed the most suitable position. "Mr. Dean, did you secretly negotiate with the barbarians in the past few days? What is the purpose of your cooperation with the barbarians? Is it for money or power? I heard that you—" He didn't finish his words as he was pulled away by a person from behind. "What are you doing? I arrived first." "Mr. Dean, you—" He didn't finish his words as he was pushed away by another person. Dean smiled as he saw them scramble. "Don't worry. It's raining outside. Come in with me." They stopped after they heard Dudian's words. Noyce, who was waiting at the door, saw Dudian. He rushed to the edge of the door. "Master, You are finally back. Old Feline, Crone, Zindral, Jake and others were surprised as they heard Old Feline's words. They rushed to the door. Duddian stepped on the steps and put away the umbrella. Let's go inside. He shook the umbrella and handed it to Noyce. You're back. Old Feline had just stood up, but hadn't reached the door yet. He saw Duddian, who was surrounded by the crowd. There was a trace of joy on his old face. Why didn't you send a message so that I could send someone to pick you up? Duddian smiled. I've said that I'm just going to study new inventions. I'll come back once I have the results. What's it to pick up? Old Feline was startled. Don't catch a cold. Lon, go and pour a cup of hot tea for Mr. Dean. Yes, the middle-aged maid replied. Duddian entered the hall and looked around. He saw that all the members of the Ryan family had appeared in his castle. He looked at Old Feline. Patriarch, let them go upstairs first. These friends from the newspaper want to interview me. Jean, give them towels and chairs. Don't let them catch a cold or get sick. Yes. Noyce nodded. Old Feline looked at Zindral. Let the children go upstairs to rest. Don't cause trouble here. Yes. Zindral looked at everyone in the hall. Hurry up and go upstairs to rest. Jake secretly glanced at Duddian. He waved to his wife and children and took the lead to go upstairs. The rest of the people followed behind him. In the blink of an eye, the hall was empty. Here. Noyce handed the hot towels and chairs to the 5 reporters. The 5 of them were pleasantly surprised and repeatedly thanked him. They didn't expect to receive such treatment with their status. Before Dean came back, they were stopped from entering the castle to take shelter from the rain. But now they got the courtesy of guests. He looked at Old Feline and said to the 5 reporters, You have worked hard. Who wants to be interviewed? Ask one by one. My time is limited, so I'll give you half an hour. Each person has 6 minutes. Now, who wants to go first? Old Feline nodded and said, Who wants to be interviewed? Ask one by one. My time is limited, so I'll give you half an hour. The 5 of them replied, Mr. Dean is too polite. I'll go first. One of the middle-aged men opened the notebook. Mr. Dean, why have you been missing for so long? I heard you say that you went to study a new invention. Is that true? Dean smiled. Of course it's true. I swear by the God of light that I never lie. Forgive me, but the military newspaper has reported that the barbarians who were captured by the military confessed about you. If you want to incriminate someone, you can always find a pretext. Dean's face was full of righteousness. The middle-aged man was stunned by Dean's imposing manner. He quickly responded, But this is a matter with conclusive evidence. Mr. Dean, what evidence do you have to prove that you have been studying new magic during this time? Of course, I have produced new inventions and handed them over to the temple. I believe there will be results soon. You have produced it. The middle-aged man was stunned. So fast? Didn't you just create the lightning rod divine art last time? It's only been 10 days, and you've already created a new divine art? Dean replied, If it wasn't for the noise in the newspapers these days, then the new invention would have come out much faster. This time the new invention was conceived a long time ago, so the production was very fast. So, the middle-aged man slightly opened his mouth as he didn't know what to ask. After a moment, the middle-aged man adjusted his thoughts and asked, Mr. Dean, even if you have produced a new invention, it doesn't prove that you have been studying it all this time. I heard that you colluded with the barbarians to get power and retaliate against Melon Consortium. Is that true? I need to correct you before answering your question. I didn't collude with barbarians, and I don't need to collude with barbarians. I have too much wealth to spend. Mr. Dean, I'm sorry, but your time is up. Next. Hello, Mr. Dean. I am a reporter from the Brief Reading Morning Post. I just heard about your new invention. I heard that every time your new invention is published, it will be snapped up by major consortiums. The pre-sale price is extremely shocking. If someone wants to buy your new invention this time, what price will you offer? Legendary item price. This is the lowest price. Thank you. Legendary item price? Mr. Dean, did I hear it wrong? The man was startled. Old Feline and several other reporters were stunned. They looked at Duddian and suspected that he had made a slip of the tongue. But soon the reporters put away their surprise. They would exaggerate their words to create gimmicks when writing news. It was hard to guarantee that Dean wouldn't use this gimmick to disturb the previous news that was unfavorable to him. The more they thought about it, the more they felt that it was highly possible. Half an hour later, Dean ordered Noyce to give umbrellas to the 5 reporters and sent them away. Dean turned to old Feline after the 5 had left. I've read the newspaper. Although the New World Consortium is facing bankruptcy, but it is a time of war, so the bankruptcy filing procedure will be delayed for some time. The money from the sale of the lightning rod will be used to fill the hole. They will pay us back 1,000 times. He had read the newspapers for the past few days when he was in the hotel. The situation was similar to what he had expected. The only thing he didn't expect was that the New World Consortium would go bankrupt and the Ryan family would owe huge debts. But thinking about the means of the Melon Consortium, it wasn't surprising. Old Feline's heart calmed down as he heard Dean's words. He was worried. You came back too late. The Melon Consortium is dominating the general trend, and your reputation has fallen to the bottom, especially after the military newspaper was published today. The previous doubts have turned into one-sided accusations. You have aroused public anger. If it wasn't for the heavy rain, I reckon that a lot of people would have come to smash the door. Dean smiled. That's why I have to thank the rain. Yes. Old Feline sighed. You can still laugh at this time. Dean smiled. The enemy has gone crazy. Why wouldn't I laugh? As for the anger of the people, you don't have to worry about that. Since ancient times, for thousands of years, the commoners have been fools. What they see is what we let them see. What they think is good is what we praise. What they hate is what we criticize. How much they hate me now will be how much they love me in the future. Old Feline was silent for a moment, but the overall situation is in the hands of the Melon Consortium. Although you can contact Scott Consortium and Huashan Consortium with your identity and value, they can use their own newspapers to whitewash your name. But the newspapers of the military have completely dyed you black. What you say now is useless. No one will believe you. That's why I won't say anything. Dean said, black or white, let the world judge. I just have to do my job. Old Feline was startled. Do you mean the invention? Dean smiled but didn't speak. Dudian looked at Noyce after the rain subsided a little. Jean, go and bring Sergei and Gwyneth back. Yes. Noyce nodded. Sergei and Gwyneth returned to the castle after an hour. Gabriel and Artemis were also with them. Dean asked Crone to arrange a room for them. He called Sergei and Gwyneth. Both of you go to the Golden Wall and survey the situation of the war. Report back at any time. Sergei, Gwyneth, Old Feline, Zindral, and others were surprised to hear this. War? Are the barbarians attacking the Golden Wall? Sander was aghast. How could it be? How could the barbarians choose to attack today? Old Feline looked at Dean. Are you sure? Yes. Dean nodded. That's bad. If the barbarians attack us, we won't be able to explain ourselves. During this period of time, the newspapers will be focused on the situation of the war. No matter what we say, no one will read it, and no one will ask about it. Furthermore, there won't be any newspaper that will report about us at this time. This will cause public anger. We will be finished once the war is over. It doesn't matter if the barbarians win or lose. It will be useless to explain at that time. Old Feline's face turned ugly. He couldn't help but cough violently. Dean got up and patted Old Feline's shoulder. Patriarch, don't worry. I'm here for everything. Old Feline's cheeks turned crimson as he looked at Dudian. Dean, you must grasp the opportunity. We don't have much time. Sergei shrugged his shoulders as he saw Old Feline's expression. Old man, why are you panicking? Who knows if the barbarians will attack or not? I have been with young Master, but haven't seen the front line. Maybe young Master is wrong. Old Feline was startled as he looked at Dean. Dean said, the war has just started. The military shouldn't have enough time to pass the news. I hope they can survive today. Otherwise, everything will be in vain. How do you know that the barbarians will attack? Old Feline asked. It's raining. The savages have been living in the radiation zone for a long time, so they are not afraid of the rain and have strong resistance. However, it's different for our soldiers. Even if they are strong, once they are drenched in the rain and do not bathe in time to keep warm, they will fall seriously ill. Moreover, they are fighting in the rain. Even if they do not die, they will definitely fall seriously ill. The barbarians have broken through the king's fort, so they have been aiming at the Red Maple Mountains. It's easy to defend, but difficult to attack. It shows that the barbarians have been planning for a long time. They must have very smart military staff. If I was the military staff of the barbarians, I would also propose to fight at this time. Dean didn't want to explain, but he saw that old Feline was concerned about the matter. The barbarians will benefit from fighting in the rain. If they are smart, then they won't choose to launch a general attack. Instead, they will choose to consume the barbarians. Barbarians will suffer losses in every wave of war of attrition. But the soldiers who participated in the war will be seriously ill after the end of the war. It will be difficult for them to participate in the new battle. If there are 3 rounds of attrition, then the military will have to replace 3 batches of soldiers. The soldiers who are seriously ill are no different from dead. Once the barbarians win, they will become a pile of grass targets. Old Feline was startled. Sergei, Gwyneth, Crone, and others were also startled. Dean looked at them, but didn't continue to speak. In fact, he knew that the barbarians would attack in the heavy rain. Another important reason was gunpowder. When he escaped from the prison, he discovered that gunpowder was one of the forbidden techniques of the Dark Church. This made him feel very strange. The Dark Church was an evil organization that specialized in the use of poisons and alchemists who use human bodies to conduct experiments. How could they give up gunpowder, which was such a terrible and lethal thing? If the amount of gunpowder was enough, then they could flatten the headquarters of the Holy Church. Such a lethal weapon was listed as a forbidden technique. It was conceivable that there must be a deep reason behind it. Although Dean didn't know the reason, but at least he knew that the Dark Church was helpless. If there was a way to force the Dark Church to not use gunpowder, then there was no doubt that it would be the military. But if the military knew about the existence of gunpowder, then he believed that there was no reason for them not to use it. This was a weapon used by the old countries to unify the world. Chapter 361. Crone, go and contact Huashan Consortium and Scott Consortium. I'm going to hold a conference. Dudian ordered Crone. Yes. Crone nodded and left. Conference. Old Feline looked at Dudian in surprise. Are you going to announce your invention? I've only heard about product conferences. I've never heard about an invention conference. Won't your invention be leaked? Dudian replied. The temple has used the aura of the god of light to beautify it. I've submitted my invention, so there's no need to worry about leakage. I'm just going to introduce my invention to attract the attention of the people. The previous 5 reporters were mainly focused on the issue of him making peace with the barbarians. They thought that this was a hot topic. Although he had repeatedly changed the topic to theurgy, these reporters who were sent to interview him seemed to be experienced elites from their respective newspapers. They did not get sidetracked by his topic. Therefore, they had to specifically report on the theurgy conference to divert the public's attention. Will this work? If the Golden Wall is as you have speculated and a war is breaking out, then tomorrow's headlines will be occupied by the war topic. It would be difficult to publish your invention even if you hold a conference. It would be a waste of an opportunity. Old Feline was worried. Dudian said, so we have to create enough explosive points to attract people's attention. Old Feline was startled. Is there anything I can help you with? Dudian laughed. Take care of your body. That's the biggest help you can give me. Old Feline smiled. At this moment, a guard at the door ran over and reported, Old Patriarch, young Master Dew, there's a carriage from Deity's Templar coming. Carriage from the temple? Dudian was surprised. Old Feline looked at Dudian in doubt. Prepare to welcome them. Dudian ordered the guard. After a moment, the carriage stopped in front of the castle. 3 people got off the carriage. They were wearing the pure white clothes of the temple. They respectfully greeted Dean. The leader was a middle-aged man with neatly combed hair. Architect Dean, I'm a reporter from the temple. I'm here to interview you mainly about your new invention. Please cooperate. Dujian's eyes flashed as he nodded. No problem. Please sit down and serve tea. The maid served tea to the 3 of them and brought over chairs. Oracle Dew, I just learned that you have submitted a new divine art. Can you tell me what kind of new divine art it is? The middle-aged man politely asked. Dean smiled and pondered. It's a bit hard to say what the specific type is. In short, it should be suitable for any field, any domain. The middle-aged man was startled. Old Feline, who was sitting next to him, was also shocked. Theurgy was divided into 9 schools, and each school had 2 main categories of theurgy: military and civilian. Military theurgy was further divided into close range, long range, offensive, defensive, and so on. Civilian theurgy was even more diverse, divided into manufacturing, sewing, and so on. An invention that could play a very important role in a certain category was already a top-level invention, not to mention that it could be applied to any field. It was simply unheard of. The middle-aged man recovered and said, Architect Du, aren't you exaggerating a bit? According to my 6 years of experience in the temple, I have never heard of any kind of magic that can be applied to all fields. Even the most popular plastic magic doesn't cover such a wide range of fields. Dudian smiled. I believe in your professionalism, but I hope that you can believe in my judgment as a senior architect. I'm not exaggerating. If I have to say which field I'm best at, then it's the military. Especially in large-scale wars, it has an incredible role. It's no exaggeration to say that I can easily slaughter an army of 10,000 as long as they use my invention. Old Feline and the middle-aged man were speechless. How could a team of 100 people slaughter an army of 10,000? This was a 100-fold difference in military strength, not to mention a frontal massacre. Are you kidding me? The middle-aged man was stunned for a long time before he gradually reacted. He couldn't help but say, Although I believe in your judgment, isn't this a bit too exaggerated? It's simply a miracle. Are you saying that what you created is a legendary military magic? Dean replied, The temple will judge whether it is a legendary item or not. But I believe that the power of my invention is not inferior to other legendary items in the military field. The middle-aged man choked again. Old Feline was shocked when he heard Dean's words. Dean's current status meant that he couldn't speak nonsense. Once he deliberately exaggerated and created gimmicks, it was estimated that the whole castle would be flattened in an instant. Even if the magistrate came out to maintain order, it would be difficult to stop the surging anger of the people. Middle-aged man saw Dean's confident expression. He hesitated for a moment, but signaled to his assistants to record Dean's words. He continued to ask, Architect Dean, have you thought about the name of the new invention? What should we call it? Dean thought for a moment. Let's call it Steam. Steam? The middle-aged man was a bit surprised, but he still nodded and continued to ask. Well, then may I ask, did you have a hard time researching steam magic? Yes, it takes a long time. It's a very complicated process. Did you come up with all your divine incantations yourself? Yes. Did you ask anyone to help you with your invention? No. The interview lasted for more than half an hour. The middle-aged man and his 2 assistants said goodbye to Dean and Old Feline. They got into the carriage and left. They didn't ask anything about your disappearance. It seems that the old saying, rumors stop at the wise, is very reasonable. Old Feline looked at the middle-aged man and the others leaving. Dean calmly replied, It's not that they didn't ask, but they came to help me to restore my momentum. Help you? I'm a member of the Divine Hall and a genius with great potential. I'm a rare figure for the Divine Hall. After all, the Divine Hall is under the command of the Holy Church. Although the army and the Holy Church seem to be in harmony on the surface, it's hard to guarantee that there's no friction behind the scenes. In any case, the Divine Hall doesn't want to see me fall. Even if I die, it's just a loss of a genius. But this time, the shitty hat that was put on my head is too smelly. It will even affect the image of the Divine Hall. A dignified genius of the Divine Hall colluding with barbarians will bring shame to the Divine Hall. Old Feline sighed. Indeed, no wonder the weather is so bad. You have come to interview in the rain. Although the war will occupy the main cover, but at least there will be a page for you. Dean narrowed his eyes. I don't want just a page. Outer edge of the commercial district. On the Golden Wall. Under the lead of the captains of each battalion, rows of soldiers quickly ran up the city wall along the steps behind the city wall. The rain was pouring down, and everyone had a layer of military raincoat draped over their armor. However, in this urgent battle situation, it was inevitable that the rain would splash on their faces, necks, and hands holding weapons as they ran. It was just that the commotion outside the city wall was fierce, and the situation of the battle was urgent, so no one had the time to pay attention to the splashing rain. Ow! Ow! Chapter 362. Auburn's face was gloomy as he looked at the approaching army in the rain. His eyes under the helmet were full of coldness. Pass my order to the God Fire Division. Once they enter the firing range, immediately start the cannon. Be sure to kill the giant frog. Don't let them jump up. Yes. Adjutant Junlang quickly turned and left. Roars could be heard from the bottom of the high wall. After a while, the barbarian army rushed into the trap area outside the Golden Wall. Immediately, a large number of barbarians fell into the trap and died. However, in this heavy rain, the barbarians' morale was high. They rushed forward wave after wave. In the middle of the army, there were monsters that were 7 to 8 meters tall. They jumped forward and quickly came to the bottom of the high wall. Fire! On the high walls, huge black cannons aimed at the front, and with a loud shout, the cannons suddenly shot out, and the cannons shot towards the barbarian army. At the same time, the archers raised their arrows and shot out, and an endless rain of arrows fell into the barbarian army. Immediately, the barbarians at the front were killed, and they fell to the ground in a messy manner, their bodies full of arrows. Boom! 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 Explosions sounded in the barbarian army. The soil on the ground splashed several feet high. The barbarians who were roaring forward were killed and injured. This war, which had been brewing for a long time, officially began at this moment. Auburn looked at the barbarians who were killed by the cannons and arrows. His face was still gloomy. Boom! Amidst the gunfire and the rain of arrows, a 7 to 8 meter tall giant frog monster leaped to the bottom of the high wall. The people riding on top of these giant frogs had long been killed by the arrows and fell from the giant frogs. However, the giant frogs were protected by protective gear, and coupled with their extremely tough skin and flesh, they successfully broke through the layers of attacks and arrived at the bottom of the wall. Whiz! The giant frog suddenly jumped to a height of tens of meters. Boom! On the high wall, the two cannons turned around and aimed at the body of the giant frog. They suddenly opened fire, and the moment it jumped up, the cannons hit its chest and exploded. The impact immediately knocked it away, and it fell on its back. There were 2 holes in its chest, and blood flowed out. After it fell to the ground, its legs twitched slightly, but it couldn't get up again. It was obvious that it wouldn't survive. Even so, the soldiers on the high wall were so scared that they broke out in a cold sweat. If such a giant creature were to rush up the high wall during the time it took to kill it, it would definitely delay its attack, allowing the barbarians and giant frogs to close in. At the same time, various consortiums in the commercial district, as well as the Holy Church, the magistrate, and other forces, received 2 pieces of news one after another. The first news was that the genius Oracle, who had recently been in the limelight, had developed a new divine spell. The 6 consortiums who got the news immediately sent people to Dean's castle to prepare gifts. They were ready to visit Dean to discuss the advanced purchase of the new invention. Of course, the Melon Consortium was not included. Mel family. In the ancient castle. What did you say? Did he appear? How is it possible? Didn't he go outside the giant wall? Did he sneak back? Sarah Mel was surprised as she looked at the short-haired maid Lisa in the spacious dark red office. Lisa bowed her head. There is no news from the people in the giant wall passage. It is possible that they were delayed by the rain and couldn't get back in time. Impossible. Sarah frowned. The carrier pigeon was the moon crow. Even if there is heavy rain, it won't affect the moon crow's flight. He either didn't want to leak the news, so he bought all the people there, or he sneaked back. She suddenly thought of something. She took out a map from the drawer and spread it on the table. This map was the map of the outside of the giant wall. It covered the hunting areas of various consortiums, as well as the 12 entrances to the giant wall passage. All of them were marked with gray areas. The closest passage to the Death Passage is the Scott Consortium's passage. If we go directly from here, we will enter the first hunting area of the Scott Consortium. There are monsters above level 20 in there. If we take a detour, then we'll be blocked by the Ghost Fish River. We can only enter the 7th hunting area of the Scott Consortium and go around to the passage entrance. Sarah Mel thoughtfully looked at the map. Did he expect us to deal with him outside the giant wall and deliberately chose to take a detour? But that is the entrance of the Scott Consortium. The hunters stationed in the 7th hunting area of the Scott Consortium shouldn't let him enter their hunting area unless there is the acquiescence of the superiors of the Scott Consortium. But how could the Scott Consortium allow him to enter their own hunting area and use their own passage? Could it be a condition agreed upon during the previous negotiations for the purchase of divine arts? She frowned, raised her head, and said to Lisa, "You said that he has submitted the new magic to the shrine? Go and investigate the process of him going to the temple. See if our people have noticed his whereabouts along the way." Lisa said, "Miss, I've already asked the shrine. Just this afternoon, when it was raining, someone saw him go to the shrine to submit his new magic. Someone also saw him through the window. He walked up the mountain alone, carrying a bag with his new magic inside." Sarah was startled. She muttered to herself, "Strange, did he really do it before? Did he send someone to disguise himself as the person who went outside the giant wall? How is it possible? If he has been inside the giant wall, then how could he not know about our big movements? If he knew about it, then how could he not refute us? If that's the case, then we won't be able to explain, and all the attacks will be useless. What's the use of him coming out now?" Lisa said, "Miss, is it possible that he was too engrossed in creating a new invention that he lost contact with the outside world?" Sarah slowly shook her head. "This person doesn't seem to be a simple person at his age. Moreover, it's impossible for him to not contact the outside world for such a long time. If he's really in the giant wall, then there is only one reason. He deliberately connived us to attack him and discredit him. But I can't think of any reason. There is no reason for him to do this." She shook her head. "Perhaps I am thinking too much. He has been outside the giant wall from the beginning. Moreover, he has cooperated with the Scott Consortium a long time ago. He was able to share the entrance of the Scott Consortium and then sneak back. But it shows that he knows about the turbulence inside the giant wall. Even if he knows about the situation, he still dares to sneak back. If he doesn't have the confidence to win, then he is too stupid to think that he can rely on his invention to save the situation. Perhaps the sensation caused by his invention has made him think that as long as he produces a new invention, he can get the respect and love of everyone. Humph! The anger of the people has been aroused. This time, it is a matter of life and death for everyone. How can a mere divine art suppress it? He is too naive. It seems that I overestimated him. He is excellent in producing inventions, but when it comes to the military and people's hearts, he is too small. He is doomed to be bleak." She gently shook her head. There was a trace of regret on her face. Lisa said, "Miss, I heard that the price of his invention is legendary level. Do you think he will really produce a legendary level invention?" You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.